So, hey everyone, guess who I'm with today?
We're back.
We're back. Uh, yeah, Allison was like, "Hey, we should do another thing regarding this whole Elon Musk Twitter thing and kind of people's perceptions about social media." And I know I've seen, there's a lot of stuff going around about how, you know, Elon Musk is going to deliver us free speech and a lot, and in those conversations, obviously the larger system, the larger program is not talked about. And so Allison, so Emergent, Superorganism, Musk, Twitter, and AI spin.
Yeah. Well, so one of the reasons I wanted to get together and talk about this a little more is that the backdrop to a lot of the research that I've been doing has been around cybernetics and the idea of engineered behavior, because that's really central to the impact investing conversation that we've had. And I'm getting more depth of knowledge about how it works, and I'm trying to start to incorporate more very, very general understanding of some of the electrical engineering and the way in which electrical engineering principles that are used in like signals intelligence are also being used to manipulate social structures, both for impact and ultimately, as we're talking about this, the World Brain Project, the Reiser Stallman Kunst, world brain, how the cybernetic engineering of individuals and societies feeds into that. And I think very much that Twitter is an example of, in probably ways that are even more direct than other kinds of social media, although Instagram, I guess, is images, so that's simpler, is that it's abbreviated. And so it's sort of like neural signaling of communication that spreads throughout. And so I think a lot of the conversations, clearly, as I mentioned, we're always in narrative warfare. And part of the narrative is being able to deconstruct which narrative arcs are leading people in which directions. And my feeling is that Musk was brought in as a quote unquote polarizing figure to intentionally polarize, for the purposes of signals intelligence, the existing community within this electronic communication system as sort of a test case. And so I wanted to spend some time today talking about cybernetics and machine learning and emergent behavior and my understanding of Twitter's relationship with MIT and their social machine program and electronic government, and what that might indicate in terms of quote unquote free speech moving forward, and sort of dissect some of the polarity of the conversations that have been happening that I think are being structured with an intent to not necessarily surface the cybernetic origins of this, but to make it personality based, which we're always talking about. Don't look at the personality, look at the system. What are they trying to lead you to in the system? So,
yeah,
I don't know. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just kind of remarkable to me that people don't seem to get out of that rut. Whatever the discussion of the day that's presented to them, even in the resistance space or whatever, people just continually take the bait, and I think we need to be a little bit more proactive about who we listen to and what narrative and what story we're promoting. And through working with you, Allison, and all the stuff that I've learned this past couple of years, it's like there's this system in place that doesn't get talked about at all. It's just like they're going to take one little piece of it, and then we'll talk about this one little piece of it. So yeah, hopefully we can make some inroads here.
I will admit I'm a rank amateur when it comes to electrical engineering, and clearly there are other people who are probably better suited, who have a background in how the electrical engineering works, to talk about this. But I think The best practice is to try to jump in and learn as much as you can yourself and be willing to work collaboratively with other people and develop your knowledge base. Because I think that the systems of power that are already in place benefit from us only staying in a well-trod path of material we're comfortable in. So if you're out there and you're an electrical engineer and you see something that I'm off base on this, please correct me in the comments or wherever. But I'm trying to sort of intuitively sense my understanding of social systems and finance and overlay it within the electrical element. So this first slide, actually a central character in the cybernetic space, his name is Norbert Wiener, and he was sort of a child prodigy and taught for many, many years. He was a mathematician at MIT. During World War II, he started to develop the field of cybernetics around making calculations for armaments and missiles, the trajectories, which is a very complex calculus, and then eventually became involved in developing systems that led to the first systems of computing. And then later on in his life, began to somewhat, as many of these scientists do once they've created these things and seen the repercussions, question where it was going. And so I think, especially given my background of the wrench in the gears, this is a very interesting cover, The Human Use of Human Beings. And this book was originally published in 1950. And I think at this point, Norbert Wiener was seeing where things were headed in terms of automation. And I would say generally was coming from the frame that there were many wonderful opportunities. I guess maybe I mean, he wasn't a communist, but that like the super luxury like automated communism kind of model that everything was going to be automated and we were all going to be freed up to live our best lives. And this was great. Only there might be some small hitches on this so that we should be cautious about. And then I think as his life went on, he became more and more cautious about how things were going. But I feel like in many ways the framing of the human use of human beings, where human beings are embodied communication that's now being channeled into social media, is sort of an apt framing for what we're talking about. There are some humans that are using the rest of us humans to accomplish a certain end. And perhaps if we all were equally informed of what the program was, so that our base of knowledge wasn't disproportionate and we all had an equal voice, we could come to some good resolution. But I think for the most part, people understand that the tech sector and then the finance sector that underlays it has a lot of insidious power, and most of us don't quite understand how it all works. So it's very hard to feel in control of the systems. And I know you have some thoughts about that, Jason. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about the new, I'd just been watching some of those more human energy videos on like the noosphere. So I was kind of like thinking about two different things here, but it relates, like the use of human use of human beings. And so the idea that, we are just material to be used, and as opposed to life having some inherent value in and of itself without having to serve some other agenda or whatever, the people that are behind this, they don't see it. They don't see a tree. They see wood. They don't see a human being. They see labor towards some end. And, it's just a different way of looking at the world. And most of us don't think that way. So it's kind of hard for us to wrap our minds around the fact that, a lot of these people that are selling us something have a different orientation than we do,
Right. And I would suspect that most people who spend their livelihood in the tech sector are surrounded by other people whose minds work the way they work. And they might presume that we all understand and that we're all in agreement with where things are headed. Or maybe they actually haven't met people who might object to where things are headed. And so they don't really know that there's not necessarily a consensus on digital society and algorithmically guided society, especially when a lot of the algorithms are driven by incorrect data, or where the programming of the system, we didn't participate in the programming of it. So Anyway, that's sort of the overall framing I want to talk about. And eventually it may not even be the human use of human beings. It may be some sort of cybernetic entity that we become enslaved to the system that we created. And it is a mechanical system. And I think that towards the end of his life, that's where Norbert Wiener arrived at, was that when the point comes that that the machines do all of the labor, that we are then reduced to the slaves. And
well, it's also interesting that, as you listen to more of these talks of people that are promoting this, it's like they feel like they're going to control this thing. They feel like they're going to be in control of it. And as far as I can see, it's going to swallow them up as well. It's crazy to me.
Okay. And so part of the thing, I've been spending a lot of time, and I'll have some screenshots of this giant map that I've been making, but I've been looking at the Macy Conferences, which were these early conferences in the post-World War II era that were brought together many people. It was a merger of the biological sciences and the social sciences to talk about engineered life, pretty much, and engineered social systems. And it's not until you actually stop and look at all of the careers that these people have around, the ones that I'm familiar with, sociology or anthropology, but then things like biophysics and biosemiotics and ways in which life can be engineered as a computational system. And, we spent a lot of time in the last video talking about the intersection of animation and computer-assisted design, both within an animated pixel-based format where you're animating a movie or some sort of, digital reality, or using computer-assisted design to design synthetic life in a molecular engineering format. And so just to get in the headspace that it's both the tiny scale and the macro scale, that they're looking at engineering things as small as a cell to as large as a cosmos. And they're trying to get this full spectrum dominance, which we've talked about often. But that our neurons, and the way in which our brain thinks, is communication, both within our mind and consciousness. And then how we communicate our thoughts out into the world is increasingly through signals intelligence that's digital, that is electronic, that can be measured and weighed and sorted and reinforced or diffused depending on what the end state is, that one is the ultimate goal. And we feel like it's unbiased, but I think increasingly people realize that most of these systems have bias built into them, and that they're not completely transparent, that the way in which algorithms are used and information is uplifted or suppressed is very intentional and comprehensive. It's built into the whole program. So anyway, this image is simply looking at Turing, who was one of the first people to posit artificial life, the continuum from mathematical logic and computing and information theory all the way around to neural networks and neuroscience. And that was something that, Joseph was very aware of, was this idea of like the neural nets, artificial neurons, and then modeling that, and then learning from that, and then using that to apply back to living systems, both living beings and social systems. So this is part of my big map that I've been working on, and I'll share the slides, and I have source links so you can sort of zoom into different parts of the map. This part has Elon Musk is sort of the center there. And, I've pulled out, I know he has many, many companies, but, some of the most prominent ones, Hyperloop and Neuralink and Starlink satellites and Tesla and Twitter is in there. Raul brought to my attention yesterday the OpenAI Collaborative, which is sort of a platform, an open standards platform, because as we mentioned with those NVIDIA interviews, that the metaverse is going to be open standards. They're going to create standards, and then it's sort of plug and play. And as long as everyone is fits into the system, you can build it exponentially, right? And so they're looking to create artificial intelligence systems that are collaborative to help build out this artificial reality. And, as I've mentioned before, there are a number of other platforms that are linked into social impact finance and the impact data collection. But it's interesting to realize that both in Stripe and in the OpenAI, that Peter Thiel is a backer of both of those, and the idea of paying for content creation. So that's part of the reinforcement mechanism, right? Is that you create social media platforms and then you reward certain behaviors. And we know that those rewards currently exist in terms of view counts and sort of dopamine hits and affirmation and comments. But eventually there's a plan for all of this to be monetized, but monetized in a way that's I describe as behavioral script, pretty much. So I would say while Elon Musk is out front and he does have these connections, there's part of me that wonders to what extent he as an individual is actually responsible for these companies versus that he is a character playing the person who's responsible for these companies. And I think that there's a difference in that, that we need to understand it as a performance, really, as opposed to a firm and fixed reality. I would say that what's behind this is actually more that Twitter is the toy of MIT Media Lab and the social physics programming, and has been for a long time. And so that is the crux of the conversation to be having. Although at the beginning, I do want to touch on a couple of aspects of Elon Musk's sort of family background that beyond his business holdings, I think might inform how we think about social engineering and electrical engineering.
Yeah. And also I'll mention there's this channel, Common Sense Skeptic. It's kind of interesting. They're challenging Elon Musk from just the science. They're just kind of debunking a lot of the claims that he makes, and it's pretty interesting. There's some interesting videos on here just in terms about that in many ways the guy is a fraud. Like many of the claims that he makes are fraudulent, and a lot of the beliefs people have about him starting PayPal and him starting these Tesla are actually not accurate. So that channel is pretty great for clarifying about who he is. And if you listen to him talk, he's actually not that bright of a guy. Like, I mean, there's videos online making, jokes about some of the dumb things he says. And so this guy is this genius mastermind. I don't think so.
But it's a performance. I think I guess that's for me, that's what it feels like, is a performance that's meant to distract you from the structural underpinnings of what is happening. We're not spending a lot of time talking about systems engineering and its impact on how we understand our material reality. It's a popularity contest and an ideological engagement that is actually not really necessarily based in a lot of real provable stuff. So so I will mention that I'm not sure exactly how I have it set up slide-wise, but one of the people that I'd like to talk about a little bit in the context of Musk is actually his grandfather, Joshua Norman Haldeman, who was he was the son of Canada's first chiropractor, and he was a pilot, an adventure pilot, and he was involved in the technocracy movement, which is something that Patrick Wood talks a lot about, the technocracy movement, which came out of the US and Columbia University. But he actually ran afoul of the Canadian government at some point and then decided to relocate the entire family to South Africa just a few years after apartheid was implemented. And at the time, South Africa was, again, Canada, South Africa, crown colonies to attract, white, affluent white families to come. And it was sort of like, look, we've got this great thing going here. So within the context of geofencing and passports and, biometric pass systems, I feel like that's a notable something of note. So this is just to sort of hit on, again, I think what we really should be talking about is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And it's history in the war machine, it's history in venture capital, it's history in signals intelligence. And, the fact that it's, right there in Boston, we've got Harvard that does a lot of the policy work, and MIT does a lot of the technology work, and also business policy and digital currency. But it's embedded because of its situation as an elite academic institution. And then being in Massachusetts, there's quite a number of things as we go through today of reflecting on liberalism, or as we commonly understand it. And I will say, when I first started out in my education work, Massachusetts is sort of uplifted as, very good education system, very progressive state. It has this certain aura about it. And the more I experienced both connections with people who were in the education activism space in Massachusetts, the murkier things got. And then the more I started to dig into social impact finance and into the military, I was like, wow, it's kind of like California. I'm like, Massachusetts, you aren't exactly what I thought, but then maybe you were. Like, maybe if we understand it as, the pilgrims and this manifest destiny, maybe it is what we thought, but maybe how we think about it should change. So anyway, so this is the lab of Warren McCullough. He was one of the key people in the cybernetic space. He was a neuropsychiatrist. He was very interested in embodiments of mind. And in the last couple of conversations we've talked a lot about both with What's Left, and I think that the Alice discussion we had about creating cognitive models, understanding how the mind works. Where is mind? Where is consciousness? How do these things interact? How do individual minds interact with other minds? And that has been a fixture of interest for a very long time. Most of the 20th century, right? But it really picked up steam in biocomputation in the post-war era, because now they started to have instruments that they could use to make additional hypotheses about how they thought the mind worked. And so these, the Macy Conferences, as I mentioned, they ran from 1946 to 1953, and were very much about engineering both biological processes. Arturo Rosenbluth, he was a collaborator with Norbert Wiener, and he was a physiologist interested in neural signals, both of the heart and the mind, and then again, like we have Warren McCullough. But they look like, you wouldn't necessarily imagine that humans, human control of human beings, right? It's so civilized. It seems like, look, they've got their ashtrays, they've got their books, they're sitting there, and this is how things are planned out. It's not like, it's just very matter of fact that this is what would happen. And I think this is the challenge, even though within the Macy Conferences, they were integrating social sciences and life sciences. Regular people aren't in those rooms. Regular people aren't there to say, perhaps the powers of these systems that you're imagining could be used to dominate society in ways that we can't fully appreciate right now.
On the surface, I was just that title, Embodiments of the Mind. The mind being a physical thing that's embodied. I just think about the title of another book that I have called Philosophy in the Flesh by Lakoff and Johnson. And that's actually a lot of the foundation of Stephen Newcomb's book, is this book. But it just made me, I don't know if there's even a connection there, but like the idea, the book Philosophy in the Flesh is the idea is there's these concepts, it's really talking about metaphor, and there are these ideas that we cannot think about without putting it into like a physical like reality, like the embodiment of it. I don't know if there's a connection there or not.
But it's interesting because what we're dealing with now, as they're trying to bring digital minds, really like these artificial minds that are created in neural networks in digital space, out into being embodied in these humanoid robots, or not even, they don't necessarily even have to be humanoid, but to take a mental model system and then bring it from a digital sphere out into a three-dimensional material world, it's really complicated. And a lot of the models that they use are like, how do we get it to walk? How do we get it to, these very basic things that once you become embodied out of a mathematical equation, the world gets a lot more complicated, and we just do it effortlessly. But this all has to be managed. And I think in some ways, the cyberneticists are seeking for us as embodied beings and beings of flesh and mind and emotion and soul to be mind, to give that to these agents that are mechanical agents, and to use that for that end. And we may not always be knowledgeable, knowing, or willing participants in that process, especially children.
Yeah. Well, and that relationship between the physical and the, things that are kind of not embodied, like a love, like love is not a thing that you can hold on to, and that's what they talk about in this book. It's like how we use metaphors. You fall into love. That's a physical activity, but you're not literally falling. But there are these concepts that we can't wrap our mind around. But it's almost like these people are they're trying to take that to the next level. They're trying to literally embody love, or embody these things that are intangible, I guess. I don't know if that's the correct way to put that, but
but that's for the social engineering. And that's what I'll get to a slide a little bit later, but about Jeremy Bentham and his idea in the 18th century of measuring, grading different activities as far as if they brought pleasure or pain, and then coming up with a calibration and then engineering it towards happiness, right? And, this is something that was mirrored later within the Foundation for Integrated Education, Pitram Sorapkin. He wanted to quantify, and Robert Hartman, quantify love, quantify altruism, because if you can't quantify it, you can't use it in your simulation. You can, if it's not something that you can translate into a mathematical language, you can't use it as an input. And so that's what I think we're at and that's part of the background of Twitter is, I think what they're trying to do is create shocks to systems to try to trigger emotional reactions and then replicate them mathematically. And by discernment of trigger events, and then to measure it computationally to try to translate that into sort of a psychic, the social psyche, kind of, a mental status, taking the temperature, of the society based on what you've done to it, what you've introduced into the system. In this case, the purchase of Twitter by a polarizing figure. This is an image of Haldeman. To me, actually, my friend Steffers raised this issue, and because I'm not in that field, I wasn't aware of it, but in retrospect, it's very interesting. So Haldeman, again, his mother was the first chiropractor in Canada. He followed in her footsteps. So the focus, as I understand it, of the field of doing, I don't know, is it chiropractic? Is about adjustments, like spinal adjustment, and it is about energy. So it is an energetic system that you are adjusting within the body. And so as we talk again about the levels from like individual molecular levels and electrons up to larger social systems, and we'll talk about sort of polarization and magnetization and spinning, that he was a chiropractor and he understood the way in which energy is represented in the body through kinesthesiology is very interesting to me. The other element is that he was a pilot. And I've noticed this in a lot of people who we've come across, right? Howard Hughes, individuals who were involved early on in the aerospace industry and flying. And in the book, The World Brain, they were actually talking about, I can't remember, it was the guy who wrote The Little Prince, that he was a pilot and that his view of the world was changed by going up high in the air and seeing immediate environments that looked more like organic systems. And that other than maybe the balloon people doing hot air balloons, that no one had that perspective on the world before. And then later, they talked about the astronaut looking back and seeing a planet Earth, and it's a system, it's a spaceship, it's a unifying. So from a systems theory standpoint, the fact that he was both this adventure pilot who had a different viewpoint of the world as a social system from above, and as a chiropractor who was someone who was interested in making energetic adjustments to the body, I think that this is going to relate later as we talk about managed systems management. This is just an image from Canada. It's an interesting article if you want to read a little bit more about it. Again, I'll have the slides with the source link. It said on October 13th, 1940, a Regina chiropractor named Joshua Haldeman appeared in city court to face 2 charges under the Defense of Canada Act. His alleged offense was belonging to Technocracy Incorporated, an organization that had been banned by the Canadian government several months earlier as part of a larger sweep of groups it considered subversive to the war effort. And, I've spent some time, I haven't done as deep a dive as others into the technocracy movement. And again, I'm always a bit loath to choose it's that group, it's that one group, because for me, it seems like it's more of a system of how society operates. But the key element of the technocracy movement had to do with inefficiencies of capitalism, waste, and the idea that you would defer governance to experts in their fields that would manage really the world based on an energetic currency economy, which many people are finding correlations to now with the climate narrative and carbon offsets, and linking that to one's purchase power and one's behavioral power, that seems to be coming up more prominently lately, among the various other isms. But I would note that you can see the young women's blazers, that they actually have the logo, which is sort of the yin yang, which if you look at that as an energy, which I hadn't until I started preparing this talk, I had just seen it as sort of a Asian, but not really as an electrical engineering, that it is a polarity, that it is a balance, it is a balanced system, which is, I think, what the technocrats were after, was an expertly controlled balanced system with this homeostatic character, and that they would do that through compromising maybe people's individual liberties and organizing social systems as a whole.
I just wonder what they're looking for. They're all looking for something.
Well, they're very coordinated. Everybody's very disciplined. I mean, clearly they're all working together.
Yeah, they're very young too. I'm looking at the pictures. These guys, they look like they're, maybe even almost like just out of high school teens. Another thing I find interesting in this thing is that they found it subversive to the war effort. I find that kind of interesting, and I know that a lot of the selling points for these things is, we'll have peace. We'll be able to bring peace in the world. And I think about that, even emperors and kings of old would sell, if everyone were just under my rule, we would have peace. There wouldn't be any, if everybody just submitted. And so this is kind of another idea. If everyone just submits to this system, there'll be peace. And of course it's people are never going to, there's always going to be someone that's going to be like, no.
So one of the other people who was involved in the early technical alliance at Columbia, his name was Charles, it was actually Proteus Steinmetz. And he was essentially like a wunderkind who was a wizard with electricity. And he was at General Electric, and his focus was on alternating current. And I think we talked about that a little bit on one of the other talks, sort of the difference between direct current and alternating current. And again, within the polarization system, and I have this sign that shows the, yin yang. And, I've talked to with Deepti about this at some point about sort of even within in India, like the tantric yoga, the male female polarity energy and the circuit and keeping things in balance, that's sort of what it exemplifies. This idea of, so what Steinmetz was known for was researching polarization via using magnetization, which again, it's not my specialty, and I'm sure people who, there was somebody named Pete Ramon on Facebook, but now I'm off Facebook, but he was really talking about iron nanoparticles. And so within the geoengineering or some of the terraforming or the food additives, if we're looking to use frequency to sort of catalyze biological changes or mental changes in living systems, having, iron and electromagnetism, it seems like that may be related. That the system was always about going back to equilibrium, but that you would have these transient shocks and then watching the signal return back to an equilibrium process. And so for me, all of these apply to engineering techniques, but I believe that those people who are in power, the people who are at the Macy conferences, were understanding those electrical systems and then directly and indirectly using that knowledge to begin to steer the world in towards this sort of unified technocratic program and to condition us for it. And so...
and you said all of this applies to what? You broke up for 1 second there. All of it applies to...
just the social engineering towards a global unification of, the world brain system.
Well, and also, go ahead. Sorry.
No.
The polarization thing too, and the idea of using that, like you said, within a social media space of like, inciting people and using that as a power base. Starting to see these social media spaces in this context as well is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a circuit. It's a network of circuits, and it's at a macro and micro. And so we are representing ourselves through our online engagements, and I use Twitter a lot. So I'm going to have to sort of reflect on what this means, for me, because I think a lot of it is about developing out the digital twinning and then seeing your impact on others. And I can even see within my Twitter engagement, it's dropped off precipitously. Like my count keeps going up theoretically, and who knows if those are even actually real individual people that represent, but it's in the engagement. They can dial it up or dial it back at will. And so what kind of communication is it if you're putting stuff out and you're not actually, it's not reciprocated, or the message just goes into the ether? Then it knows how you're projecting, but there's no
it's collecting information on you, but you're not getting anything out of it. You're not, we're there ostensibly to communicate with others and to share ideas and to have discussions and to even just in our personal things, share, hey, this is what I'm doing this week or whatever. But I don't think people realize the degree to which this whole space, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever, the degree to which it's being manipulated, like on a whole other level. So I've talked to you about this, Alice, and I don't think I've ever mentioned this on a video yet, but so I manage your channel, your YouTube channel, and I also have my own channel. And I will make a comment on one of your videos, and when I'm logged into my account, I can see it. When I log into your account, it's not there. And I've checked this several times. And the implications of this are massive. Like, I don't even fully understand the implications of it, but I know it's massive. Because the idea to build little walls and then build little tunnels, like we can connect these people and we're gonna divide these people. So basically you and I, on as far as YouTube, the only reason I can see this is because I have access to your account. But you and I are basically, YouTube has said, no, you guys are not allowed to communicate, or it's a one-way communication. Like I can look at your videos, and I can leave it. And then I'm like, what's the point of leaving a comment? Like, I know it's just like not even going to, it's who's going to be seen by, and then they can pick and choose who sees it. I mean, the ability to socially engineer and to create, to incite people to withhold information and to release information at a micro managed level like that is really disturbing, and I think people really need to think about that. When I left Facebook, it was kind of I was torn, because I want to keep in touch and I want to communicate with people, but I just saw it's way more insidious. This is way worse than just straight up censorship. I mean, I was pissed off about YouTube before all this happened, because they had deleted some videos of mine saying it went against community standards, which it didn't. And I was upset about that, but that's just overt censorship. This is next level. This is like censorship, and you don't even know you're being censored, or you're being censored with some people and not others. I mean, that's right. That's scary.
Well, and now we have devices that can track your emotions, right? They can look at your eye pupil dilation and your reaction to content. So they can even automated probably calculate to create the polarization that they want. Like, when do I drop that message on your social media feed, right? When your pulse rate is this, right? Can we bump it up higher? And then these systems feed each other. And so it's, and yet here we still are. So, yeah. Okay. Okay. So I have a nice video clip on my channel with Stafford Beer, who was sort of the father of management systems theory and management cybernetics. So not just taking it engineering life, but engineering like it within a business context. And so he talks about what cybernetics is, and he breaks it out, and he talks about that essentially if you picture. And I've had a couple people come online and say this is not accurate, but he mentioned some sort of Greek boat that was like a rowing boat, and that the person in the back was supposed to steer it towards the lighthouse, and that depending on if the wind or the rain came along, that you would come back onto course by just tracking against the lighthouse. And that was cybernetics, or governor. It translated, I guess, into Latin into a governor system. And so that's sort of how it works. And I think the systems that we're working in, when we think about them talking about the circular economy, and I think even social systems, is that they try to create enclosures, either like at different scales, like small scale enclosures and larger scale enclosures, as sort of these test beds and test labs. And so you're working in the system, in these cybernetic systems, but it's not an open and organic system. It is a closed and a mechanical system. And so when I was looking up the cybernetics, I'll just read this definition. It says it was coined from the Greek word, I can't read Greek, in the 40s by a pioneer of high-speed digital computing, Norbert Wiener, to describe the entire field of control and communication theory, whether in the machine or in the animal. And that's from Cybernetics, 1948. And his message was twofold. With the right systems of feedback in place, mechanical control systems could achieve the level of independent operation and agency traditionally associated with biological organisms. Okay, so machines could act as biological organisms. And then through the careful study of how feedback systems regulate biological organisms, organisms could be understood and manipulated like machines. So there we go. We were talking about that before. So for example, by modeling the evasive behavior of a fighter pilot as an oscillating feedback system, he could develop a gun to predict a path of enemy planes. And so he could make these predictions. And that's what we keep talking about with social impact and gamified life, is that they're making predictions. They're putting you in an enclosed system. They're tracking your past behavior. They're predicting your future behavior. They're monitoring it within a feedback loop. And then their financial systems and defense systems, really, and intelligence systems are placing bets. And what was a bit overwhelming to me was today when I was trying to pull up the cybernetics definition, was that Google Cloud actually has an open source system now called Kubernetes. and increasingly, it's sort of like they talk about containerized systems. And I think, Jason, what you were saying before is that the technology is getting to the point that it's created in sort of modular units that you don't necessarily have to have high level technical expertise to operate. like it's not at the same level of coding that people were using when they were trying to do these vacuum tubes in the 1940s, that you kind of have these plug and play systems, but you don't really know what's in the box. You're just given a box and you're told how it works and that it's good for you and it's convenient. But we're starting to put together all of these modules of AI and data analytics, and we're building these twins, but I think we don't have a comprehensive view of how it's all working.
Gotcha.
But you can see the logo of it is a steering wheel. So they're steering. We are being steered.
Yeah, that's what just blows my mind about this whole thing is it's being sold as somehow some kind of liberation. It's gonna give us more power. We're gonna get rid of the feudal system, as Tamika Tilleman talks about. Like we're gonna this is gonna free humanity, and it's not. It's gonna steer humanity.
It's a steering wheel. It's a giant steering wheel. It's an invisible steering wheel. We don't know it's there. Although Google conveniently put it out there for us today. So yeah. And I mean, I think it's not like we don't know it. We do, but we're just not thinking about it all the time that we're using it.
Yeah, and
so,
I was looking at the Kubernetes thing too. I was looking at the Kubernetes thing because I didn't realize that was a Google thing, because I'd heard about it. I did some videos for a Linux class, and they were talking about Kubernetes. So I don't always associate it with Linux, and I'm looking at it. It's hosted by the Linux Foundation, but yeah, it is Google. I didn't realize that Google was a Google infrastructure.
I mean, essentially all of this stuff is just integrated.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, everything is integrated upon integration. There's nothing that's separate, which is what's so strange when people keep trying to point out, like, it's these people's fault, or it's these people. I'm like, it's all integrated. It's the system it's the water we're swimming in, is
right.
that we've made, we're in this water, and we have to actually see it, that it's all of the parts.
Well, it reminds me of the partisan politics. It's like these people like the Democrats are bad, and they're like, you're right. The Republicans are bad. You're right. And it's like nobody puts these two things together. It's like, no, but you know what I mean? Like, so this is just that in a larger scale. It's like, it's this guy. You're right. It's this guy. You're right. It's also that guy.
Right. And so, even though, we've seen earlier with the deplatforming, the move towards blockchain, social media, right, in terms of the video platforms and content creator platforms being on blockchain and payment systems being built in. But I think it is the networking and the connection of all of a person's data into one node, where you can create the interoperability of how past actions reflect future actions, how past actions impacted one another, sort of the complexity theory. It all starts to come together when you have this digital identity, which is the digital twin. And I didn't actually pull out an image of this, but when Musk was talking about like authenticating accounts, we know that that's where things are headed, right? Like it's going to be when you go onto the internet, you're supposed to authenticate yourself, and there will be some crisis that forces that issue, right? They will create a crisis that will now, and it will be part of the buildup. When I was looking at the Global Education Futures Forum, and this was in 2015, I think, they, within their map, their timeline of education to 2035, at some point on there, it was a unique identifier to access the internet. Right. So this is, and I'm sure that was cooked up well before 2015, but it was on the map. And so, and this speaks to Bitcoin, but I think really any of the decentralized ledger systems. And when we were talking the other day about the MTA conference and Scott Stornetta talking about, his involvement in another early decentralized encrypted ledger system, that they're talking about these things as if they were organisms, right? And that's what Norbert Wiener was saying, right? If you can create the right feedback loops and the right systems and the reinforcement protocols, you can make a digital system, a mechanical system, appear as though it were a living system. And so, already, and I know Bitcoiners are a whole nother league, they have their whole other culture that they're part of. And I'm sure that that's by design they're probably a test bed for what does this culture look like, right? How do we manage this culture? But they're talking about it sort of as a mycelium. And this is Brandon Quittem. This is, but he's not the only one, of talking about Bitcoin as not only an architecture or a social phenomenon, but he talks about it as a catalyst for human evolution. And this corresponds with what we've been discussing with Oliver Reiser in the World Sensorium and sort of radio eugenics and this boost, which aligns all the way back to the 60s and 70s, the human potential movement, right? That we are going to have some uplifted consciousness that lifts us up from being mere material human beings into an alternative electrical energetic state. I mean, we already are, but a different kind, something that's perhaps more ephemeral, I guess, or more connected. And so I think my title of talking about it as a superorganism is that Twitter in and of itself, once everyone is authenticated on accessing the internet, will be melding us as elements of the superorganism. And maybe we get to be different kinds of fungi, the bodies, the fungal bodies that come out, but it really is the network itself that underlies all of it that's never going away. That's, I was talking with What's Left, and Eduardo had a question about ghosts, right? Like, our digital ghosts, and where are we floating around? And I'm like, I don't know, Eduardo, maybe we are. Maybe not ghosts. Maybe we're just part of the fungal network, the neural fungal network down there. And so this is the other piece. So, it turns out, so MIT Media Lab, and I think I have a slide coming up on this, but that they actually used a small town in Spain, and it's Jun. I don't know if you pronounce the Jun, it's Spanish. It's in Granada, and they had all of the citizens of this small town, which is like a suburb of Granada, to authenticate themselves, and that they were supposed to interact with their government through Twitter specifically. And then all of those interactions were analyzed by MIT Media Lab and their social machines program, and then they developed probably some sort of government efficiency model. And that really is along the lines of the technocrat system. This is actually an article that I used in a piece that I wrote a few months back, the Namshub of Inky. And the woman at the bottom there, her name is Bettina Warburg, and she's actually connected to the Warburg finance family. She's a co-founder of an organization called Animal Ventures. Now, it's a company that's teaching people about the Web 3.0 space and blockchain and building all of this up. But it's a very compelling name, I think, when you think about it as behaviorism. And so what she talks about is your government on blockchain being like a vending machine. And I might just read this out in case there are people who are listening to this while they're busy and not able to read the slide because the text is a little small. But it says, and this was written for the British Council, right? And I keep talking about empire, manifest destiny, crown, control. So it being written for the British Council is significant. But what is a blockchain, you may ask? A helpful is the experience of using a vending machine. The terms of the transaction are straightforward. You drop in payment, make a selection, and in return, you receive your soda of choice. Vending machines encode a little contract. If I pay you, I will release a product. We are not relying on a bank or a salesperson to perform this transaction. Rather, it is being performed by code on the machine. The state of the vending machine changes over time based on each customer selection, and the machine will stop selling soda in a given row once it runs out. We can think of a blockchain as a similar structure, a state machine that manages the inputs and outputs of transactions, and anyone who uses it is dealing with the same reality, the same vending machine. Expand this simple analogy to an image that isn't run or owned by a company. Instead, we can see exactly the code that the machine uses, and we are able to verify all the transactions ourselves. Rather than only delivering sodas for money, this expanded machine can execute any transaction written in code, helping to automate business logic. So this is really where we're going with when you look at Estonia, when you look at digital citizens, when you look as, your government on a smartphone, that's Ukraine, as a vending machine, that it is somehow a neutral, transparent process. And that happens through your authentication as a digital citizen, right? So, when we talk about this program where people are tweeting their government, And that will probably be linked to social impact. There's an agreement that Twitter has made with the UN around impact data and the Sustainable Development Goals. Imagine that your tweets to your government become part of your digital twin profile and indicate your user status within the government and your ability to access services, or your predictive profiling about your future use of services, or if you've been a good citizen and accruing additional credits to your account in your interaction with the government. And part of my frustration lately has been within this weaponized narrative space. It's a global project, guys. All of them are in on it. All the countries, all the governments, all the money, and there's a very diffuse network of middle management people who, whether they want to acknowledge it or not, are running this program, and nobody's outside of it. And so when I have people who want to frame this as a Chinese social credit score, that flies in the face of the fact that this is Bettina Warburg, who's writing for the British Council, who's telling you that your transparent government is going to be on blockchain. And that many of the people who are asserting, a future of digital inclusion and freedom are people who are libertarian, right? And so we have to get clear about the story that this isn't a China gulag program, because I've had people assert this who are literally living in the belly of the beast of this machine. I mean, we all are, but some nodes are more strong than others, and still wanting to live in the story that somehow it is out there away from them. And I'm here to say that it's not, and that we actually have to be able to dissect the narratives and be able to say, do you want to live in a world where you interact as a harmonized digital citizen with a vending machine government or not? Because to me, that seems post-human.
You mentioned that it's everyone, and I've had people, jump on my case like, well, everyone can't be behind everything, behind the conspiracy or whatever, like the way they frame it. But the truth is, like, the overwhelming majority of people that are making this happen don't see themselves as part of like this larger thing. There's a very small handful of people who actually, I think, have this broader bird's eye view understanding of things. So yes, you can have like the majority of people being involved in a conspiracy that they're completely unaware of.
Right, because you're not supposed to look across. You're not supposed to look outside your lane. Just stay in your lane and do your job and have your token. Here's some tokens. If you just keep going, I'll give you some more tokens, So this is just reinforcing about behaviorist conditioning and the use of tokenized incentives, whether it's pellets, whether it's money, whether it's freedom tokens, to accomplish your goals. So this is a really quite disturbing image, and it actually is from something called Project Pigeon. And this was a project that was initially created as part of the lead up to World War II through the National War Defense Council, I think it was. Vannevar Bush was in charge of it. And B.F. Skinner, he was the project lead on this. It was called Project Pigeon. And what they were training these pigeons to do was, with the motion of their neck and head, was to actually steer missiles. And so the pigeons were the first guided missile systems. And so you can see the way in which the biological processes are, these pigeons are contained, and really they just want the mind. They want the mind and a very limited movement of the pigeon to accomplish their end, which was a war end. And that they were training pigeons with pellets and getting them to peck the things they wanted to peck. And I feel like that is very much where we're going with digital media, run by algorithms and run by impact investors and run under the guise of social impact, social engineering. So Animal Ventures is Bettina Warburg's company. And as we build the Web 3.0, we're walking into a digital space that we don't control, and that we are being controlled sometimes in ways that are obvious and sometimes in ways that are very subtle.
And, another thing on this pigeon here, going back to like, you and I would like never, ever in a million years do something like that. and it's hard for us to wrap our minds around the idea that there are people in this world, people in positions of power, people that maybe you even, voted for or whatever. But there are people that don't think like us, that this is not a big deal to them. It's just a pigeon, and that think of us as human beings in the similar way that they think of this pigeon. It's hard for us to wrap our minds around that. And I think that's one of the obstacles that's in the way of people actually, facing reality and then maybe doing something about this and maybe changing the course of our history. I don't know. What do you think?
No, well, and part of it is which lives have value, right? Because they probably like, well, we're waging war. I mean, what is a couple pigeons? What is a couple million mice? What are these? And yeah, it will be humans using human beings. And so we know that they've tested a lot of these systems that are coming online out on unwilling participants. Often people who are vulnerable, who don't have anyone who's able to stand up for them. So, I mean, to me, it's a very compelling image and something that we should all be thinking about.
Yeah. I mean, you said, or we're waging war, or we're building a renaissance. We're going to build this beautiful, amazing thing. I mean, in their mind, that's what they think, that we're evolving humanity. So what's your free will?
Right. I mean, I do remember, I'm trying to remember the name of the short story. Is it Omelas? Was it Ursula Le Guin? It was a short story about like this society that was just quite wonderful. But once a year, there was like this child kept in like a dank basement that was like the sacrifice. Right. And I don't know if they had to think about that child on that one day, but like that the misery of that one child was what allowed the rest of the civilization to, be glorious. And that, you were supposed to just, forget about them most of the year. And then once a year you would think about it. But again, I don't know how relevant that is for what's coming, because I feel like the scope of the reach of what's coming is at a much vaster scale. But definitely in the past, for the U.S., it's succeeded on the dispossession of people in other countries, the dispossession of the poor. If it's not immediately in your face and affecting people you love and care about, you just don't think about that story. That's just not part of your story. You're not really meant to think about that. And because it's overwhelming to think about how to fix it. I'm not here to say I have any easy answer of how to fix the misery of the world, but I think when all of this comes home to the United States, like that we are an empire, and that the reality of that, to be able to actually look at that with clear eyes and know it, and then figure out what comes next, is really a central part for me of the program, and perhaps why I get so frustrated when we continue to redirect away from us. And I'm not saying that other countries aren't also doing this, but you and I are in the United States, and we actually, those of us who live here, need to interrogate the histories going all the way back. Okay, so I'm just going to read this. This is from the World Sensorium. I've been tweeting a lot about this book, and thanks to Steffers for the copy. I think that it will speak a little bit to the electrical engineering elements that I was talking about. And I was just reading this on the bus the other night, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is physics. Now, the book isn't a physics book. It's a book that's laying out the plan to create a one world global brain and a unified, harmonized society that then sort of uplifts us into this next stage of evolution. But the choice of language, I think, is very intentional. Again, the Oliver Reiser, the World Sensorium. The lead into this, at just the end of the previous paragraph, says that a program based on health is so quote unquote practical that any special interest group would attack it at their peril. So that's just the lead in, right? So the idea that we have a global system of perpetual pandemic preparedness is exactly in alignment with what they were talking about in this book in 1946. Okay, so then the next paragraph about the physics. We previously mentioned the need for producing a balanced, dynamic, spiraling movement. So spiral, that's the spin, towards some magnetized objective. It is in such concepts as planetary good health that scientific humanism finds these objectives. Such a broad planetary polarity might well serve as the catalyzer which could project into the fluid solution of world culture the magnetic pattern of a global society cohering the parts and dispersing the current patterns of anti-humanistic vectors. So I'm just going to hit on, you have spiraling, you have magnetism, polarity, fluid solutions, magnetic patterns, coherence, and vectors, all in one paragraph. Well, on the other side, you'll see there, it says further economic planning. There's a second arrow, total employment, planned production, planned distribution. And so those are all things that you might start to hear about around, a jobs guarantee, things, cooperatives, cybernetic economies. That those are things I think that are increasingly going to be coming up relating to supply chains and the climate narrative.
I'm curious what they mean by anti-humanistic. What's their definition of anti-humanistic? I'm curious.
Well, I mean, I think this was written in 1946, right? And actually it was literally probably less than the year after we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so this is an American professor, the chair of philosophy at the University of Pittsburgh, who earlier in the book sort of says, American democracy is going to be the catalyst for this new matrix of, cybernetic world brain life. Now we've just we've just destroyed a country in that way. And yet we're judging other people about their, laying out anti-humanistic vectors. I think it's kind of mind-boggling actually to think about it. But the idea that you need to create electrical transitions almost to change the way people's minds work, to erase, if you imagine magnetic storage. Jason, you probably know better than I on the electronic, but the storage in computing systems is magnetized, right? You just wipe it with a magnet, right? Wipe it, get the individualized characteristics of different cultural groups around the world, and we're going to just wipe all of that out as sort of anomalous factors and create sort of one harmonized frequency. And yesterday I did a program with my friend Zakia about eugenics, and I said, her audience is more, Black nationalist, radical nationalist audience. And I said, once they create this harmonized culture, I'm pretty sure that the global South is not going to be the prevailing culture, right? It's going to be harmonized, and it has clear eugenic overtones to it. And so who's the chooser, choosing what this planetary society is going to be? I think the power dynamic and the potential for erasure of vast numbers of classes of people, while at the same time having the social media sphere uplift every aspect of identity and representation, but with the goal of knowing that you're going to erase it anyway, is interesting to me. And so, and again, I included a small source link about social network economics. That's Sandy Pentland. And I've been studying Sandy Pentland, looking at his work for quite some time, because he was actually one of the earliest developers of Internet of Things and the idea of wearable technology and tracking social systems through phones and various kinds of tagging systems. Very interested in emergent social networking and making those visible to the machine. So I think it's useful. Part of what I'm wanting to do today is to introduce some concepts that people can then spend some time getting more familiar with against the backdrop of this Twitter, spectacle. So the MIT Center for Constructive Communication, they were the ones who were part of the Spanish town Twitter program. Deb Roy, he was one of the key figures in that, and he directed the Laboratory for Social Machines. And actually went to the Laboratory of Social Machines in 2018. I was in the Boston area for an education conference, and I got to go. And this is sort of my introduction to the idea that anyone would even think of humans as social machines. But if you're in that space, you don't even think twice about it. And in this video clip of him talking about using data for social impact, literally he has all of these sensors in his home, and his toddler, they were talking about because they have a camera, the nanny talking about the child wanting a glass of water and how the child communicated and having it all on film and like documenting it all. And these people literally, they live in societies where they imagine that level of surveillance, that auto surveillance is a good thing and a wonderful thing because it can help you sort of computationally understand life and your relational systems. So, he was also the chief media scientist for Twitter. So when I say that Musk is there to give you a good show, while in the background, the MIT Media Lab and the Social Machines Lab are engineering the whole system, this is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so finally, here is the slide that I have about the Spanish program, and it says, oh, they ditched bureaucracy, so they're going to run their whole town on Twitter because that's not bureaucratic, right? It's just electrical engineering communication, and so you can look more into this, but they did this test for a number of years. This is in a suburb of Granada, and I had not actually really looked to figure out where the town was, but as a landscape person, I think it often is significant. So,
well, I also just want to interject here too. The idea behind a lot of this stuff is democratizing governance to a greater extent, but it's actually not. I mean, if you actually study all the problems with democracies and even, supposed representative democracies, whatever, it's not like there's layers and layers and layers upon corruption. And I mean, the idea that Twitter, like, we already know there are bots. Like, how many bots? You're going to have bots running your government. I mean, it's totally insane.
Right. It is. Well, and this is 2015, and you can see, look, you can report crime on Twitter. Like, imagine what that's going to do to the AI. And you can book your doctor's appointments, right? Because eventually your doctor's appointments are really also going to just be a bot, right? You can just have it all, just live your life through these electrical signals communications. So what I found was very odd was that they actually erected this obelisk in the town with the bird on the top of it. And, they put their handprints in the cement at the bottom. Now, this obelisk is in a traffic circle. So it's kind of a cheesy looking, it's an odd thing. But what I thought was interesting is, like, when I was looking into just sort of, well, what is it about Granada that might be of interest, that it was actually the stronghold of the Moors. So, it was the last sort of stronghold of the Moors' control of the Iberian Peninsula, and that was Granada. So that's, to me, it feels significant in that if you talk about cultural homogeneity and erasure and the crown and domination, that an area that was held by the Moors for so long that now you're taking over the government and you're running it through Twitter. Additionally, I was looking up just the meaning of obelisk, and I'm sure there are folks who are much more deeply connected to esoterics than I am, but just talking about the worship of the solar gods and then this fusion of earthly and divine power. Because I think a lot of the communication has to do with actually photonics and optics, that we are communicating through these neural network systems, but we're channeling our communication into a place that makes it machine legible. And so the idea of light being contained within these digital mechanized and engineered communication systems is interesting. And then this fusion, right, of divine and man, that this evolution 2.0, the human plus advance maybe they're just feeling very full of themselves, that somehow by all of us tweeting all the time, we're gonna create these digital twins and catalyze the singularity. Okay, so I'm just going back a little bit to the Macy Conferences and talking about communication. And this is something I often hit on, but this idea of the transmitter and the receiver, and that there's a way of interpreting it, and how the communication happens. So this is from a Macy Conference write-up, and their conferences were looking at communication in terms of looking at interrelationships in dynamic systems and how the signals were routed in terms of content and the principles and the analytics. So even in the 1940s, before we had the internet, before we had social media, they were already very interested in how communication was rendered in an electronic format. And within the signals intelligence community, in this military, it was generally one-to-one communication through Morse code, through wired messages, encrypted messages. They weren't necessarily meant until, well, at least in World War I, till the later 20s, that you had radio broadcast to mass media. And then it really is only more recently that you have interactive media, right, where the media broadcasts out at a mass scale and then the masses respond back. And so all of that data analytics are being now fed into the AI systems. And I think, again, we need to understand that social media and this larger Twitter conversation is about training the AI.
And then I don't know if we want to talk about it now or not, but did you look into that Homeland Disinformation Board with the Homeland Security?
Oh, you want to talk about? I haven't done a deep dive into it.
Well, it's relevant to this because they're claiming. So the U.S. Department of Homeland Security just created a. Let me just bring up the thing. They just created a disinformation governance team. This article says to track election misinformation. I've actually found several articles that are making different claims about why it was created. This one says election misinformation. Another article I read was saying it was about information around the border. So they were claiming that Russia is sending out all these social media messages to people down there that are wanting to get into the country and saying that the borders are open. That's what they were claiming.
Interesting.
So I don't know exactly. Obviously, I think it's just a broad thing. Anything that they don't want.
Right. It would be nice to know what the list of things you're not allowed to talk about are before. But I will say, and it's not necessarily the Department of Homeland Security, but this segues more into the United Nations data sharing agreement. Is that social media is an impact space. It is being used as a social impact market. And part of the impact is shares and counts and exchanges. And so I can easily see social media tags being used, regulated to advance certain narratives, right? And narratives around, at this point, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals cover almost every aspect of life. From the judicial system to the built environment, to health, to education, to poverty. Pretty much there's nothing in the world that you couldn't attach to a sustainable development goal. So I imagine there may be some way of tagging sort of through metadata, the analytics that would feed these impact markets. And again, within a cybernetic protocol, you create feedback loops and you amplify them to get the effect you want.
Yeah. When the media or the story is that this is just about Russian propaganda. But I don't think that that's the case.
So, I've been doing some work within my larger map about this rad lab. I spoke before about Vannevar Bush and Raytheon, and that before World War II started, he was overseeing a lot of military projects. And then after the war, he founded the National Science Foundation, and he talked about going to war against disease. And he actually had quite a lot of foresight about where he imagined things going. And in the last talk we talked about a mimeograph, sort of extended brain that would be built into a desk, that you could have microfiche and you would have hyperlinked information. Here you have a camera that would sort of be a third eye, and early sort of augmented reality as we may think. And we were talking about Apple's logo and the think different. So they were already imagining this future world. And I think it's hard for us to get a sense of the lead time of the technology, because it seems like it continues to speed up so quickly. But that many of these things were happening in the late 20s and early 30s. And it's about frequency and electrical communication, and the fact that Vannevar Bush was the founder of Raytheon in 1922, and the way in which signals intelligence is being used, I think, to influence the way we communicate in ways that we may not be fully aware of yet. And I would encourage folks to listen to this, go to my YouTube channel, and we have it linked here. A lot of the work around signals intelligence and early level theoretical physics was done by Alfred Loomis. essentially made a lot of money in electrical holding companies. He got all of his money out in cash before the crash happened. And he had this private research lab that did a lot of the early work in microwave radar in the 1930s, cultivated a lot of physicists all over Europe. And actually, this woman, Julia Conant, she wrote her own book about Loomis and Tuxedo Park, and it was based on her great uncle, Willard Rich, who was a chemist there for 15 years and wrote a novel, Brainwaves and Death. And that shortly after finishing that novel, but before it was published, he committed suicide under unforeseen circumstances. And so, again, the nature of the communication, the electrical communication, and the frequencies, it goes back a long time. It's worth checking out. So within the cybernetic construct, you're allowed some play, right? But the idea, and this is going to feed in within the climate narrative, is the idea of homeostasis, cellular homeostasis, that things come back into balance, that is, that things go out of balance and then they come back into balance. And the idea that the world could be remade as a homeostat. And so, like, imagine your thermostat in your kitchen, or a governor kind of system where any action is accounted for and then automatically counterbalanced. So Ervin Laszlo was a systems theorist. This was actually presented in a 1980s speech he gave, and it was a piece. It was a speech about peace. So you're right, Jason. I just want to amplify, a lot of these totalitarian systems will be brought in under the guise of peace, that we would engineer the world for the benefit of all humanity. And we would monitor the ecology and the population and the economy and the security. And this is all very much linked to the World Brain Project. Ervin Laszlo worked on Emerging Man with Julia Stolman, the 1973 book. But he keeps bringing it up. And again, the Baha'i faith is a faith that is Persian, and it's connected with science and technology, science and faith, bringing those together. You know, what could possibly go wrong, right? We just want to engineer the world for good. Oh, look, the executive grievance system. Imagine how busy that would get.
Just tweet your grievances and we'll get right on it.
Tweet your grievances to the cloud. And I'm going to just read this off. So this is from the same speech, and he describes what this world homeostat system would be. There was a central guidance system operating within a world system and regulating functional states. So that's an electrical structure. The world system is the totality of the social systems of the globe, together with their technology and ecology, right? Like running the world as a machine. It's embedded in the wider environment of the ecosphere. The ecosphere is a region of structuration superimposed on the sun to space energy flow of the Earth's surface. And then the objective is to stabilize the world system around states that offer optimum conditions of need fulfillment for the human population. To assure the objective and basic structural design is respectified to include additional components and provide specific subtasks for each. And they give you the thing. So they're telling you that they're going to run the world as a totalitarian project, but it's just for your own good, right? And this seems to be well underway, but with no one really consulted on the fact that this is the program. So, and again, people might not understand that this, that these programs, I mean, I guess a lot of the people in the resistance are, but again, they're framing it as the Chinese, right? And I'm like, no, it's the Hungarian systems theorists. The Hungarian Martians have been planning this all along with like the folks over at Pitt and, Bettina Warburg. It's not just China. And one of the things that within the homeostasis is the idea, I was looking back to where did the Limits to Growth book come from? And that came out of MIT. It was commissioned by Club of Rome. All of the imposed systems that are coming will happen through a Malthusian lens, right? They need to create the crisis and they need to create the imperative that everybody go along. And I think to a certain extent, I've talked about that the Cold War, the dropping of the bombs to getting everybody in line, and then followed by the climate narrative. And so then they want to reframe the Earth as a cybernetic system. So guess what? It's a spaceship. So Limits to Growth was influenced actually by a gentleman. His name is Kenneth Boulding. He was one of the founders of General Systems Engineering. He was British, but he actually married an American. And he was an economist. And he was essentially he was a capitalist, but he wanted to have it overlaid with morality, a moral science, morals as a science involved with capitalism. And to me, that sounds an awful lot like impact investing, right? We're going to have capitalism, but it's going to be the good kind. And some of us are going to decide what that looks like. He was actually influenced by Henry George, who was sort of a progressive force, but the idea of land tax and holding natural resources in common as a counterpoint to property ownership and rent. And I think it's important I need to know more about Henry George. There was one of the presenters at the MTA conference, and he was actually presenting on smart, sustainable cities within a framework of Harvard Georgianism, sort of a Georgist sustainable smart city program. And so the cybernetic system, I think, is very much aligned with, we're just going to do nice things for you. We know that the spaceship Earth is limited, so we're going to share more resources. Only the people who are plotting out the program are the people who hogged all the resources in the first place. And I really am not buying that they're into actually redistributing. But the idea of the Earth spaceship feeds into Buckminster Fuller, who wrote a book about the operating manual for Spaceship Earth. It also feeds back into like the idea of the biosphere, the idea of Epcot at Disney. All of the idea of these closed systems are what is the cybernetic living system construct is about. I don't know, does that make sense? Because I was really curious, where did limits to growth come from, other than just general Malthusianism going back to the 18th century? And it seems to have come from this idea that Boulding asserted that, hey, we're all on a spaceship. Ultimately, actually, his book came from George, that in 1879, in this book, Progress and Poverty, he posited this idea of we're all going through space on a spaceship, but the stuff is not equally shared.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of blows my mind because like spaceship is something you would think of originally from science fiction from like maybe the 50s or something. But the idea that concept was even around even before that, it was kind of a shock to me.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, if you look up Spaceship Earth in Wikipedia, it has quite a few references, like Adlai Stevenson. He had a big speech to the UN about Spaceship Earth. There was another one, I can't remember which astronaut it was, who supposedly looked back at the Earth and said, oh, it's so beautiful. And so like this really catalyzed the Earth movement in the 70s that ultimately created the closed system approach and then set the stage for this, Rio summit in, I guess, was that 92, and then ultimately the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals. So, within the closed system, right, we're talking about limited resources. This is a clip that a quote that I pulled from Emergent Man, which is the Irvin Laszlo and Julia Stolman book from 1973. And this is actually the first chapter with Abraham Maslow, who talks about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But it's actually quite telling that, I only had heard about it, this hierarchy of needs. It sounded very warm and fuzzy, but he's actually asserting a pretty controlling outlook that is very much in alignment with eugenics. And he's talking about that there would be like, who gets to choose? And it says, it's been my experience through a long line of exploratory investigations going back to the 30s that the healthiest people, or the most creative, or the strongest, or the wisest, or the saintliest can be used as biological assays, or perhaps I could say as advanced scouts or more sensitive perceivers, to tell us less sensitive ones what it is that we value. What I mean is something like this. It's easy enough to select out, for instance, persons who are aesthetically sensitive to color and form, and then learn to submit ourselves or to defer to their judgment about colors, forms, fabrics, furniture, and the like. My experience is that if I get out of the way and I do not intrude upon the superior perceivers, then I can confidently predict that what they will like immediately, I will slowly get to like in perhaps a month or two. It is as if they were I, only more sensitized, or as if they were I with less doubt, confusion, and uncertainty. And so I think within the Twitter conversation space, thinking about this in terms of influencers, right? The whole rise of the cult of social influencers, like the heightened perceivers. And then who is the algorithm uplifting as the influencer in the equation, and that the rest of us should submit, that our version of reality should be suppressed and then overlaid by those who are the higher level and chosen perceivers for the rest of us. So yeah, so they want to come up with the simulation, the digital twins. I feel like what we're moving into is a digitally twinned world where they will create simulations that the world homeostat is geared up for peace and harmony, right? And so the International Electrical Engineering and Engineers Association, IEEE, they've already been talking about laying out the connectivity and harmonization of the digital citizen. And that's probably not even you as, it's you as a mental model, it's you as a digital model. And below that is the NTT, one of their white papers about the development of digital twin computing. Essentially, they're sort of making the connection that even as far as the first email was the first stage in the twinning process. And now with the internet and our interactions on the internet can be connected to the Internet of Things. And then eventually it will be human beings and things working in interoperable ways, that we will simply be extensions, that we will all be things, right? We will all be things. We will be the pigeon in the harness towards the digitally twinned world. But it will be framed as it's for our best interest, because we can't actually be trusted with democracy or peacefulness, that we need to be engineered into this. And they will create as many shocks to the system as they need. They can manufacture as many, whether they are real or whether they are digital versions of shocks to the system, to create submission to this, to justify the ends. Like they will wage war to generate the peace that they want on the terms that they want. And that will be that we will live as digital twins predominantly. Just amplifying again on the piece. So Kenneth Boulding, he married a woman named Elise. She was born in Norway, but then moved to the United States. And she was a sociologist who actually was well known for founding the peace movement. And so I have a book that I haven't gotten into yet, but it's called Quakernomics. And I think it actually, given the role of Penn and in impact investing and in blockchain and in neoliberal social policy and in creating the first computer, that there are many ways in which sort of this soft coup of the world towards the one world, superorganism, the world brain, the Quakers, along with the Baha'i and a few other of these faiths, like they're so quiet and nice, right? How could the Quakers possibly be threatening, right? They just like peace, and they're quiet and they're humble, but they're also very well networked and very financially connected. And so, again, no shade on Elise specifically, but I can see that her connections to the Quaker office relating to the United Nations, creating the whole field of peace and conflict studies. If you understand that, the International Peace Research Council, she was on a committee that created this United States Institute for Peace that now has a privately funded peace tech lab, right? A peace tech lab, right? The DNA of conflict, that's what they talk about, mediating the DNA of conflict. To me, that sounds very much like the harmonized digital citizen. And I've thrown up a quote from Marconi a couple times where he said, the signals intelligence will make war look ridiculous. It will stop war because it will make war look ridiculous. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure that Marconi just wanted to tune us up to the right channel, get us all harmonized so that we are like sort of digitally lobotomized. And is that the nature of the peace that we actually want, or is our struggle in the material world to actually try to become better human beings? So both Kenneth and Elise's situation within the peace movements, within moral capital, within the science of morality and capitalism and peace, I think is really an important backdrop for the ESG impact investing.
In the universities, it's the international studies, which has a massive peace component to it, is massive in universities. And I have a lot of, from what I did, a lot of people that I know were involved with international studies. And
actually, they ended up in Boulder. It's probably them. They retired to Boulder, University of Boulder. That was their last gig.
Yeah, well, I know like University of Denver has a pretty large international studies. University of Boulder, University of Colorado Boulder has a pretty big international studies. I don't know how it is at other universities, but here in Colorado, international studies is a pretty big deal, like within the university systems.
Right.
And
again, I'm not for war. I'm for peace. But the challenge is what they're talking about is peace without actually the consent of the governed, without the participation, whether it's a technologically, a peace tech version of peace. To me, that seems like an illusion. That actually is just waging war in the name of peace. Part of what I'm trying to convey, and I don't know that I'm doing it super effectively, is this idea that they want a certain amount of freedom in the system. They want to contain the system. They want to at various levels. And then within those closed circuits, they want us to act out our behaviors so that they can monitor and modify and watch our response and our compliance. And they're already doing so much of this within digital spaces and using algorithms to do evolution. But now it's an interface between real us and digital us, and trying to see how you can control social systems and then what emergent behaviors come out of them. This is just a clip. This is on my YouTube channel. It's a professor who's connected with Rice University and interested in swarm behavior and artificial intelligence. And Rice is a leader and in the nanotechnology space. It interfaces with the medical establishment there in downtown Houston. And so really what I've been trying to sort of link in the idea of Twitter as a cybernetic network, not unlike the other social media networks, but perhaps maybe even more so in terms of the brevity of the communication, the sort of small bits of information that are shared and how quickly it resonates. And to make this connection that in terms of this world brain that is pulling out all of the data analytics, not just of the content of the messaging, but how the relationships reverberate in affirmative or dismissive, derisive ways, tells a lot about the social system. And for me, I feel like in some ways, these drops of polarization into the social media space, I think in oftentimes fabricated or manufactured spectacles that are sort of dropped before our eyes, and to see how we react to them is about reinforcing the neural pathways of our social networks, of the sociology, and to then see where the patterns might break down, and then they can acknowledge that and then work to reaffirm it so that they get everyone on the pathway they want them on for future engineering.
Let's play cue up the Robots for Everyone video.
So here's our old robot platform. These robots are designed for research. They're fantastic, but they're frighteningly expensive. So I want to get robots to everyone. And the way to do that is to build this new platform. This is the Rice R1 mobile robot, and it is advanced enough for multi-robot research. It is robust enough for undergraduate and graduate education, and it is cheap enough for K-12 outreach. So these are robots that we want to get to everyone, and we want them to be as popular as scientific calculators.
So this is the wall of parts that we've slowly built up over time. So we have almost every single part that goes on one of these robots. We want to see all the lights flashing in the system to make sure every single light is working. The antennas are just like the way your phone works. We send information over the antenna, and everybody receives the same information. But their second form of communication is infrared. It's directional. So two robots are going to send IR information similar to the way a TV remote works.
The total parts count for this robot is right around 9 assembled parts. Once you have
it's actually
all the
14, I miscounted.
This robot is simple enough that we're going to offer it first as a kit form in the upcoming year, so that anyone can go and order these things and build them at home, or build them in your lab, or build them in your school.
We put them through a class last semester of freshmen, and I was kind of in the head TA, so I was responsible when all the robots had a problem, and I saw ones that I was almost certain were dropped in a pool of water at one point, and they still were able to work.
My work is on multi-robot systems. You can call them swarm robots. So I'm not interested in building one robot or two robots. I start to get interested when we talk about 100 or 100,000 robots. So in order for me to do that in my lab, I need to have a robot platform that is small enough and cheap enough for me to build at least hundreds of them.
They're following this blue robot right now. everyone that is following the blue is lower than the blue right now. With following, it's a good way to have the robots navigate more complicated obstacles in a follow.
There are many applications for multi-robot systems. Recently, we just had an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, so it would be fantastic to have, 1,000 little robots swimming around the Gulf, identifying where the oil actually went. Earthquakes. We've had earthquakes, we've had tornadoes, we've had tsunamis. Having robots that could penetrate the rubble pile of a building, look for survivors, identify is the power on, is the power off. These are things that robots can do far better than people can.
This is a flocking behavior. So their goal here is to actually just match each other's orientation. So there's no leader this time. So it's pretty much like just a cluster of robots that are all trying to make some sort of smart decision on what they want to do. And the goal of clustering is the even-numbered robots will turn red, and the odd number of robots will turn blue, and we'll see if we can get them to cluster. But they'll stay together in a cluster. I can try to separate one and say, stop clustering together. And eventually they'll all move towards that robot and they'll form a new cluster.
Here's our 2003 design. It's a full, sophisticated research platform. Here's our 2012 design. It does almost the same stuff, except it's 1/10 the price. Rice University, the R1 mobile robot, robots for everyone.
Wow. So what do they think that they're planning on doing with this?
Well, I believe that what's being set up is that if you imagine that each of these tiny robots are sort of representations of digital twins, right? Data sets. And that there are sort of rough parameters, sort of behaviors that get programmed in, whether you're supposed to follow, whether you're supposed to coalesce, whether you're supposed to repel, and that they're working to organize social systems electrically. And, he was talking about how originally they started off with these models of little robots that were bigger and more expensive, and that their goal was now at Rice, which is, we spent some time filming at Rice. They're a center of nanobiotechnology, to reduce exponentially the size of the robots, right? Until I'm assuming it's, if not already, nanorobots, right? And so what happens when you become inoculated potentially with nano microsystems and signals frequency about engineered behaviors, whether you would be aware of it or not. So for me, when I see the movements of these seemingly independent entities, but acting along the lines of guided behavior, it seems like very much in line with what we know about what's happening with social media, right? We can see people off chasing, the newest weaponized narrative installation, but it's very hard to divert people from the course because they've been programmed in such a way, programmed with certain polarities according to certain rules, and trying to divert people away from their program course is increasingly challenging. And to act as a truly independent entity that is not part of a larger cybernetic robotic network is becoming increasingly challenging. And so then how do we navigate our strategies for what we feel called to do next within this landscape? So I don't know, does that make sense to you? Can you make that connection?
Yeah, totally. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the Pokemon Go, and how they would, by having one of these characters show up at a certain time and location, they could swarm. They could swarm a bunch of people. Because I remember the first time I saw it, and I think I've talked about this before, but I was in Colorado Springs in downtown, and there was a whole bunch of people gathered in one area with their phones out, and I'm like, what the hell are they doing down there? And so my friend I was with told me about Pokemon Go. I'd never even heard of it at the time. And the idea that you could direct a large crowd to a certain location at a certain time, and I was just thinking about the power implications of that, and then even thinking about, like I said, Twitter's role in the color revolutions around the world. How they've used that to organize protests and to get people to show up, and again, like the people that are in those protests, a lot of them have legitimate grievances, but but there's another layer to that people don't think about, that how that can be used to destabilize, and that can be used for other purposes. So that's what I was thinking about when I was watching this, or when I was.
There's also a Black Mirror episode that was quite interesting a while ago. I haven't watched all of them, but this was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that was centered on the idea that through the use of hashtags, that on a given day, people who made social missteps, maybe were badly behaved or landed in the social media metaverse in some way that was not flattering or had done something wrong, that people could direct sort of an aggressive hashtag towards those individuals. And then by the end of the day, the system would calculate who was the most prominent on that leaderboard list. And then there were these cybernetic bees that would go and find the person and bore into their ear and kill them. And so it's sort of like the extreme of cyberbullying, right? But this idea, but again, framed as political correctness, right? If you fall astray of the standard narrative or whatever, I think in this thing, maybe people were legitimately badly behaved, but it was amplified within the cybernetic sphere. And then these robo-bees would go and like take you out. And ultimately, I think one of the politicians, a high-ranking politician, ended up, on the leaderboard, and what happened next. So.
Wow.
Swarm behavior, it's and I guess part of this is the conversation of, but it's just a tool, it's how you use it, right? So, are there people in the resistance who, I was trained that way, right? In the education, when I was still sort of immersed in more of a partisan stance, right? Use your hashtag, you can influence policy that way. And, in retrospect, I realized that was really naive and misguided, but they're using their own structures to capture the data to build the more granular twins, and again, trying to divert people from programming. It's challenging. It's going to be increasingly more challenging as all of the physical world becomes layered as this sort of cybernetic socio-technical system. They talk about cyber-physical and socio-technical. So in addition to how the programming happens, in this case, it was little robots, and they had rules that sort of set out how they were supposed to interact with one another. And over time that aggregated. There's a related concept called Stigmergy. And this relates to sort of social behaviors and the idea that there are traces left behind our interactions with the environment and one another that even after we've moved on are left on the environment as signaling that others coming behind us can read. And so I think that this has a lot to do with the idea of energetic imprints and conditioning. And in this case, so that they're looking primarily at insect sort of behaviors, so that have swarms. So bees, ants, and termites in particular are a focus of a lot of computational study. And so the idea that these termites, there's damage to a termite mound, and originally they're all holding these sand pellets and wandering around, but the collective intelligence starts to organize as sand pellets get put down, and then of course is like, oh, this is where we put it, and then you put it down and you put it down, and so it rebuilds it in this sort of organic fashion, but also decentralized. And so part of what I wanted to convey both with the swarm intelligence and the Stigmergy is this idea that there is so-called freedom, right? There is so-called independence and autonomy, and yet it's within certain conditions. It's as Stephen Newcomb talks about the dome. There's a range of acceptable behaviors within the narrative, and then there's play in that. And I think in the movement and then the organization is how the machine learning happens and how it learns based on monitored social relationships for that next phase of the singularity of how to be a sentient living thing. So I think the idea of both polarization, swarm programming, and Stigmergy are all working together and can be reflected in social media, but then also in terms of how we will exist in a cyber-physical reality as digital beings that are interfacing with a digital world. Another element, and this has to do with the polarization, as I've talked about, the idea of dropping in scenarios that polarize people and create spin. So up until recently, Moore's law has talked about the electrical processing getting exponentially times smaller, like every 18 months, smaller and smaller and smaller. So we have these tiny, we're dealing with nano. And we're starting to come up against a physical reality where the energetic charge can't get much smaller and work on the existing basis of a current going through an electron. And that what's coming next is actually the creation of new electronic systems where they utilize not the current through the electron, but the spin of the electron itself. And then that, I think, adds to, it removes something like the boot time of gearing up, so it makes it faster and more efficient. And so this idea that we are shifting towards from a more classic understanding of electrical engineering to spintronics, where it says the magnetic character or spin of electrons and even nuclei store information, that they have shown that the spin of atomic nuclei in silicon can store information for a minute, and that it can be read electronically and then moved along. And so the idea of the spin and the spiral is something that they talked about in this world brain, talking about creating a dynamic spiraling movement towards a magnetized objective. And I do believe that even in 1946, they had conceptualizations from a physics standpoint of how they wanted to move society into these loops and spirals. And in many respects, I think that the spin is used to keep many independent units spinning in their own narratives until the next piece of information is dropped, and then they spin in that narrative. And so they're being used at a macro level to store and transmit information that is feeding this larger noetic consciousness. And graphene is one of the elements that's being used in the spintronics. And that's an area, again, that Rice University was doing a lot of high-level research into the use of graphene, laser-induced graphene.
Yeah, I've never even heard of that term, spintronics. And I mean, how many people... I
will credit Steffers. Steffers is always out ahead of me on all these things, and she probably has much more knowledge. But I feel like for the purposes of this, I want to introduce some of the ideas, how the swarm intelligence interacts with the Stigmergy, with the spintronics, and then applying that in terms of an electrical engineering system to a social engineering system. Because I believe that is very fluid. And that, again, goes back all the way to the Macy Conferences, where they were unifying life sciences with the social sciences.
Yeah. And the reason why I brought that up, that I hadn't heard of that, is just like how much knowledge and how much research and how much stuff that's being done in small groups or whatever that the majority of people have no idea about, and yet they're making they have a worldview that's based on limited information, and there's a whole lot of other stuff going on here that would inform on their understanding of how the world operates that they've never heard of.
I agree. I mean, and the challenge is that even within the spin, there becomes socially approved narratives. So like within academic research in the social sciences, your reputation in the space, which is increasingly related to not just your publication histories, but your digital footprint and how people interact with your digital academic footprint online, and your reputation score and your influencing score, is that you are supposed to refer to other thinkers. That's how you build on your reputation, is that you say, okay, my ideas are informed by X other people. And which I agree with the idea of giving credit, but at the same time, there is a discouraging of saying, now, this isn't something that's commonly understood in the academic space yet, and yet I would like to talk about it. I'm seeing these patterns that don't have a precedent, and they're new, but they need to be discussed. That becomes discouraged because it's not already in the body of knowledge. And so their status is affirmed by uplifting existing knowledges. And so if someone was a sociologist and said, hey, I'd prefer to not talk about, like, we've talked a lot about the ways in which algorithmic bias affects, vulnerable communities. But I really think that we should be speaking more about these innovations in physics and how this relates to social engineering within the backdrop of, eugenics and, structural oppression, systematic oppression. That wouldn't happen because unless someone has already written about it, you're not really allowed to introduce that to the conversation, or you don't get much affirmation by introducing new subjects, because it's not really encouraged, because that might destabilize the existing structure. So everyone is just spinning. They just spin in their existing space, and the spiral may get wider within the existing body of knowledge, but there's not an incentive to create a new spiral from the inside, like a self-directed, self-motivated grassroots spiral creation. It's generally coming from the outside in as I see it.
Yeah. When I also think about the multidisciplinary, like how that's kind of they discourage that sort of approach to things. It's really about the expert in one field in one area. And I've talked about Marshall McLuhan, but like he was a big advocate of the multidisciplinary approach to academia, and he got like massive, like kind of hostile pushback from others, the experts, like, how dare you talk about what this is all we do? How you don't have any right to say anything about this, because, you know, we do this all day, every day.
Right, exactly. I mean, and that's the thing, the blockchain folks, right? If they want to say, oh, you know, not all of them, but, you know, you don't have standing to even talk about this issue unless you know every single bit of coding, right? And every single nuance about our newest like crypto token. And I'm like, no, I can talk about it conceptually and how it applies to all these other things. But again, I'm not in formal academia, and this isn't my, you know, paid work. So I'm allowed to say pretty much whatever, you know, I feel like talking about, and with your support. So,
well, you can do it without my support too, but I'm glad that I can help support.
Okay, so again, thinking about spin, you know, because we know a lot, like we're always talking about the spinning, right? And this sort of spintronics, and now quantum spin, right? We're moving to the point of like the speed of light, you know, moving the photonics and, you know, optogenetics and information at this, you know, quantum speeds, and how that affects society, because we can't keep up. We're still like beings in material bodies, and things in the physics space and the conceptual space are moving so quickly ahead. And for the most part, society can't participate in an egalitarian way unless we actually have a common basis of understanding. And yet it would take someone dedicating most of their time to even get up to speed to have the informed conversation. Again, not to say you can't, but it's difficult for us to be on the same page about anything, because this information, there's so much information for us to absorb. And I appreciate people who follow my work. And then to have a thought about it, right? To absorb the information, process it, internalize it, and then have your own thoughts about it. That takes a lot of time. You can't just do that overnight. And I know, Jason, you've said, you know, even for yourself, this fire hose, and me preparing these slide decks today, I don't have a handle on every single one of these concepts, but I have enough to be able to sort of lay them out in a way that I think makes sense, and to sort of introduce the conversation, because this is very much an introductory conversation. But I've been looking for a number of years at Sandy Pentland and what he was doing at MIT with social physics, and not fully grasping that social physics may actually go down to the idea of electrons in living systems, and how that works from the tiny micro scale to this macrocosmic scale, and that they are seeking through currents, you know, the imposition of electromagnetic systems to manipulate those systems beyond anyone's full awareness or any accountability for that. And so as we have our digital twins made, as we picture ourselves as data sets in those little tiny like robot computers bumping around against other things, how will the spins begin to spin us in ways that we're not aware of? And I can't say that it's not already happening, right? I can't say that that's not already the case, but it gives us a lot of pause to think about these tools, and feeling like in many respects we have become manipulatives to this larger mechanical attempt to catalyze a mechanical consciousness, and they're putting us through our paces simply to get the data that it wants out of us. Part of what I wanted to talk about today too is to sort of break down the prevailing spin narrative of the Chinese social credit, because I think if you understand within the idea of swarm intelligence, cybernetics, there is a degree of freedom, and you'll hear this referenced often, degrees of freedom, like in terms of machine learning, robot training, that freedom is built in, but it is a conditional freedom. It is measured and it is guided. And so they need to create the perception of freedom and democracy, so we will play that game. That if we all just sat still and didn't do anything, it would not be very interesting to the cybernetic consciousness. If we just said, we're doing a sit-in, we just decided we're just going to sit silently until you let us go. But they want us free and moving around. And this is very central to the idea of our understanding of democracy, democratic institutions, and our understanding, I think, especially in the libertarian sense of these blockchain token economies, of free market currency. It's free with air quotes, right? It's democratic with air quotes. So Cesar Hidalgo, he's a data analyst scientist who for quite a few years ran the collective learning program at MIT. Since then, that program has moved over to Toulouse, France, which is interesting because that's sort of the area of tech and aerospace development in the south of France. And there's sort of an interesting history there around with the rise of the Dominicans and the Cathars in Toulouse. But his background, actually, he was trained at the Pontifical Institute in Chile and got his PhD at Notre Dame. And so there's a Catholic sort of through line there. And we know that the Vatican is very much invested in ESG impact markets. And so one of the things while he was at MIT, he was conjecturing a future of what he called augmented democracy. And I came across this a number of years ago when I was in the education space, and he has a TED talk about it. And it's this idea that we will have radical democracy, and our radical democracy will be that every single social issue will be voted upon. But because that would be way too much information for anyone to deal with on a given day, we would just literally be deluged with choices, that our digital twin representative would learn us and learn our preferences, and then we would turn over to this digital representative our voting privileges on our behalf. And that's something that would sort of be probably a decentralized blockchain system. And so the augmented democracy, and I encourage people to look up the program, but you can see there's a number of very unsettling cartoon kind of images of what this would look like. And at this, you've got people who are debating issues, but it's like every person has their robot person next to them. And they sort of have this single eye, which reminds me of Vannevar Bush's, as we think, right? With the glowing third eyeball, like sticking out. And so they're debating, but ultimately it will be a debate among the robot intelligences and not really the people, but it will masquerade as a democracy. And again, it's not coming out of China. This is coming out of MIT and by someone who's now based in France. So it's a Western construct, but that we want to assert, like, the democratic imperative in the technological age is that it's this mass decentralized governance that we hand over to the robots. And clearly the mechanical consciousness is going to benefit from all of that. In one of the other images that I didn't include, it has a young man who is sort of tucked away in an alcove bed, twin bed, engaged, I believe, on a device. And he's clearly in a small studio apartment with a tiny little kitchenette, and the robot is unloading his groceries into the refrigerator. And so when I was looking at that image, the idea that you have your perpetual servant, only who is the servant and who is the master. But it reminded me of We Live. And Jason, we watched the WeWork, the documentary film about the sort of the spectacle of WeWork and trying to figure out what the heck was really going on with the WeWork collective co-working space, and that later evolved into We Live, which was co-housing. But this idea that it really is the idea of plugging people into hive units, these small studio apartments, and that you live through your digital intelligence, which is kind of like that film Surrogates, I guess. I haven't watched that one, but I've heard.
When the idea just it's like representative democracy taken to another level. Although, like I said before, representative democracy is a lie. It's a fiction. And I just saw the thing that you posted today about how did they word it? It was I'm going to try to find it because it was interesting.
I included a slide later. I added a slide.
Okay. Yeah, we can talk about that in a minute.
Let's talk about it.
But yeah, so the representative democracy, which we know, we already don't have a representative democracy. We elect human beings to represent us who don't represent us. And so I guess they're going to make the claim that, well, but the robot will actually represent you accurately.
Because it will know every nuance of your being, right? You'll have the nanobots, so it will be synced to the nano economy in your brain. So nothing can be hidden from the robot,
Right. No, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a clip that I included later, but this idea of the robots and the self-organizing multi-agent systems. And so this is something that if you're operating in the AI space, in the electrical engineering space, in really the economic modeling space, these are things people already know. The idea of, in economic systems, homo economists, that you act in terms of your own self-interest, and then the fact that we don't really. And so then they created the entire field of behavioral economics to sort of look at guiding people's behavior into the right choices. And that's what's going to be done with these programmed blockchain tokens. So Jeremy Pitt works, he's a professor in AI at, I believe, Imperial College London. And he recently came out with a book, Self-Organizing Agent Systems, Algorithmic Foundations of Cyber Anarcho-Socialism. And so again, this is this extension of a blending of all of the isms that you want to throw out, or acracies, the technocracy, Unitarianism, the Fabian socialism, the utopian socialism, energy credit, programmed behavior. And within one of the talks that Professor Pitt gave with Katina Michaels, who's, I believe, at University of Arizona, it was about programmed micro communities connected with servers in their basement and blockchain networks and energy economies. And it was framed as one of these, a democratic utopian ideal. And within this construct, he was referencing that he was influenced by Professor Josiah Ober, who is at Stanford. And he was operating in the space of classic Athenian city-states and looking at their democracy and how it was ordered and how they were able to retain political stability. And a lot of this has to do with managing information, managing knowledge, and managing people's understandings of reality, which going back to Twitter, the creation of echo chambers, the creation of walls, the reconstructing of our understanding of reality through how we relate socially, but from an engineering standpoint, that it is not actually authentically organic, that it is being run through a cybernetic filter to a certain end that we may not be aware of what the ultimate goal is of our exchanges. So this is Josiah Ober, and again, not out of China. I keep saying the social credit scoring system originated with FICO, and that's Stanford alumni circa 1956. And so the cybernetic engineering systems, I didn't include it here, but I created a map back in the day of, the way in which behavioral economics, social impact investing, predictive analytics for commodities futures trading, civil society, all of this being engineered together comes directly out of Stanford. And the idea that we understand reality through collective knowledge sharing, but that is being engineered, and it's being engineered with intention. And while the technology companies, I think many people are increasingly realizing they're not working in the collective best interests, I think we still don't have a working understanding of the actual mechanisms in play to control individual communication theory, that the individual communications and the access to knowledge or not, in the context of the access in which you are accessing the knowledge and the background of that really shapes how we see the world. And I know, Jason, you've talked about people, you're close to who interact with media and their frame, gets set in a certain way. And even if I think at a high level, that, it's very hard to get out of it, because now the entire world is made up of digital media, digital information is guided by digital information. And how do we pull out of this death spiral that we've built? since so many people's jobs, these are people who are well-intentioned, smart, bright people, but their well-being and their livelihoods are integrated into creating synthetic worlds that are subject to engineering in very subtle and not so subtle ways. Okay, so this is a very short clip from Jeremy Pitt and his conversation with Katina Michaels. And what I will say is that his book is interesting because he chooses this Escher staircase image for the cover of his book about cyber anarcho-socialism. And it's sort of this up and down staircase. It's the inversion, right? But it's a cyclical inversion. And I really struggled with this talk, which was about an hour long, because the beginning was clearly a very technocratically underpinned energy economy, UN Sustainable Development Goal aligned discussion. And then the back end seemed to have it all framed within the idea of a gift economy and social cybernetics. And I kept saying, like, the gift economy is not the same as technocracy. I mean, a collective good, but an engineered collective good, it's not the same thing. And so to me, it does represent the opposites that are at work in his thought process of this upside down staircase that's circling to nowhere. But this one clip talks about managing knowledge for stability. And increasingly, and I found this myself, I have access to so much information, and you have to be very thoughtful about how you put it together and be pretty grounded in your view of the world to make sense of the information. But people can take the same information and, depending on your worldview, position it very differently. And so managing knowledge and managing information as society becomes more and more complex and information becomes more and more widely available, the control of that knowledge, I think, is central to the military program, to the state intelligence program. If they lose control of the story of the plot and people spin out in all directions into their own ideas, then that's really destabilizing to the way they imagine civilization being in its present form. And so this is just a brief clip of him talking about managing being influenced by Josiah Ober at Stanford about knowledge management and the Greek city-state structure to social stability and political stability.
Knowledge management is a key property of maintaining some form of democracy, if you like. That at least this is what my friend and colleague at Stanford University, Josiah Ober, wrote about classical Athens, was that they managed to sustain their democracy for so long, maintain their city-state in the way it was and outperform all the others on the peninsula at that time, was not because of this one person, one vote democracy thing. It's because they actually had particular methods of managing knowledge which allowed them to solve public action and collective action problems in ways which were better than anybody else could do it at the time. Knowledge management is a key property of maintaining some form of democracy, if you like.
In other words, ignorance management. I mean, what's your understanding of knowledge management, Allison?
Well, I think lately I've been talking a little bit about blockchain neural economies and having token to think thoughts, right? Like, it's like right think. I'm sorry, you haven't earned enough token to have an original idea to think that thought today. But try again maybe next week. Maybe you've done enough good citizenship work to earn your right to think a thought. The nanobots will decide. So again, it is knowledge. It's a need to know basis, right? Everything is accessible, but you imagine, up until the cloud computing era, you would need clearance, right, to see certain things. Like, oh, that's you need a security clearance to see this information. This is a need to know basis. There's corporate the corporate secrets, right? You can only know this if you have a certain level of trust and a reason to know this information. But now it's everything. It's in the entire story, the entire narrative. I mean, at some point, even the idea that we would talk about the ethics of building your society on knowledge management might be a thought you couldn't think, right? And so everything at a micro atomized level becomes conditional. And that's, I think, going to be attached to these attention economies, blockchain economies, right think economies. Again, not from this is homegrown, right? We're talking is Athens, is Stanford, is London. So these are things that are endemic to our social system since forever. And I think people have a hard time grappling with that, because what that means is that you have to reflect on society as you know it and civilization as you know it, and then start to weigh the pluses and balances. Like, oh, okay, so if this is totally destabilizing to society, that you might have someone thinking the wrong ideas, and we've been doing this for a long time, then do we submit to that or not? Is that what democracy is or not? If you're going to have anarchy, then it needs to be cyber socialist anarchy, but on the blockchain, so that it can be regulated anarchy. We can make sure that we have it optimized for the proper anarchic levels. I don't know, but that's what I take away from it. And I felt that this clip I actually posted a couple months ago, and I'm like, this is it. This is the crux, because if you manage information, the world is made up of information and communication, how it's communicated. Once you grab that, you grab hold of that, and you can manage that on a micro level and a real-time level that's synced to your mental construct, you can be some sort of cybernetic magician and project reality onto people. And as Cliff always talks about, right, the things in your mind, the things in your head may not all be originating in you. They may be being projected and put out onto you as part of a larger knowledge management program, a domestication program.
Even just with the media, I mean, that's what the media is. It's a projection, Yeah, and the other idea, the other term that came to mind when watching this was perception management. I mean, that's one that I've been looking at for many years. This idea that they need to manage the public perception, and this goes all the way back to like Edward Bernays and the original propagandist.
Yeah, legitimate governance, right? And it's ironic because it looks like teepee poles there, which is just strange, right? Legitimate, I don't know if they're supposed to be teepee poles or something else, but they're definitely these branches set up, and it's like, okay, well, we're going to eliminate that and install our democracy.
When I was first kind of like getting into politics, and I was interested in governance, I mean, what's the best system of governance, and thinking about democracy, and I was taught this idea that in order to have a good democracy, you need to have an informed citizenry, and this flies in the face of that.
Yeah. A good democracy in this sense is one where people are managed into accepting it. And that's what creates the stability. And
largely ignorant, essentially.
Right. So I appreciate we brought this up a little bit earlier, but I added this slide today about the Homeland Security, sort of the how do they frame it? The disinformation board, right? It frames it as a partisan fight. The partisan fight breaks out, right? And so that's the New York Times, right? So the New York Times is framing this. This is a framing exercise, partisan, and you can see behind you've got the woman and you've got the flags, and she's got the blue shirt on, and it's a partisan fight, right? And so if you understand it as an electrical engineering system, which we're again talking about the magnetized objectives with planetary polarity, it's in the sensorium. That's what we've got. And so everything being put out into the media space is about advancing the electrical energetic system. So the polarizing aspect to that. And I really think that the disinformation board, that will be the knowledge management. I mean, it's very clearly, it's been laid out in 1984 and other things, and memory holding information and changing the history. But right now, with so much information being digital, with the potential to create at will and erase at will, you can literally fabricate reality if you don't have sort of a physical documentation of it somewhere.
Yeah, this is pretty disturbing turn of events. but not surprising.
And again, that it's framed as a partisan, that in the New York Times, which again, I'm not shocked, but the strategy there, this is very strategic. And I'm saying it's strategic on both sides because it's a polarity. And at the same time, there was a clip that I saw today of like Marco Rubio speaking out against it, like, oh, the Chinese social credit system, your democratic government is putting that in. But that is actually advantaging. The plan is that they want the free markets. So on the conservative side, they want this idea of free markets, but most people operating in that space aren't realizing that it isn't actually free. And it really is about this larger cybernetic planned system with degrees of freedom and degrees of freedom in which there is some movement at play, but ultimately it's all a game training the AI. But both sides are about loving the polarity. They love the polarity. And even the libertarians who are outside the red and blue, they're also loving the polarity because that's again spinning it into the freedom, but it's the dom part. It's the domination. It's free within the constraints that are laid out in the cybernetic circular game board.
Why do you think that is? I'm just curious because I mean, I've for years I've tried to understand this. Like, people are like, they dig in, they've got a position, and they won't even consider any legitimate points that their so-called opposition has. Leaving aside how this is all being manipulated, I'm just talking about at the individual level. People have legitimate concerns on the so-called left and so-called right, yet they won't actually like hear it out. Like, why do you think that is? They're like, why do you think people are so easily played?
I think we're not taught to think systematically. I mean, synthetically, we're not taught to think about systems. And I think we create our identities because our identities are now largely online, like representational. It's in confrontation to oppositional identities that reinforce what we believe about ourselves. And so, again, people aren't rewarded for original thought. There's not a reward for saying, wait a minute, I'm going to step back. And I think actually, if you look at the system, all of it is implicated on both sides, right? And so how do we look? But to do that, then there's no immediate resolution to the problem. There's not an immediate resolution to like, oh, wow. So classical democracy has always been based on an ignorant population, right? Oh, that's not what I was taught. That's not how I understood what I was living in. And then I have to revisit my whole way of being in the world and what I'm teaching my kids and how I interact with my neighbors. And if I say that, I'm going to be an outlier and I'm going to be ostracized. So I just don't think I'll say anything, right? Because there's certainly, for most of us, there's no benefit to talking about it that way. It's just, you just go back to your spiral and you spiral around it. It's a comfortable spiral, right? You've been taught to be comfortable there. And I'm not saying I'm better than other people, but when you see that the end game is cybernetic existence as a hologram, that's literally what's being conjectured, and it's something that dates back, to the again, the 46, these, people who were very high positioned theoretical physicists, and that maybe our entire conception of reality is not what we thought. I have to investigate that. Like, I'm in a position to be able to think about these things. And not everyone is. People are in different parts of the machine, and I can only reflect on my own actions and my positionality and not on other people's. But people's identity is created in opposition. And increasingly, I think that's only gotten magnified in social media. And they don't want to look. They're afraid to look at the bigger system. If you look at it structurally and there's no one there to hold your hand and give you support, it's hard. Okay, so just building on the polarization and the idea that we are supposed to be engineering in the cybernetic system of peace towards this new level of human potential, like consciousness, human 2.0, I came across this report from Rand just this morning, actually. So I added this idea in. And it's called the noosphere. It's about the noosphere and no politique. That in the context of information management, the story matters significantly, right? And so that they need to factor into geopolitics, there's the hard power and the soft power. And that increasingly, because of the story and the amount of information and how things are evolving, that they need to work on something called no politique. So in this quote, this is from the report, it talks about the noosphere favors upholding ethical and ecumenical values that seek harmony and goodwill, freedom and justice, pluralism and democracy, and a collective spirit harmonized with individuality. It is an anti-war and pro-environment concept. Strategically, it implies thinking and acting in global or planetary ways while minding long-range ends and the creation of new modes of agency to shape matters at all levels. It is about the co-evolution of the planet and humanity. So I'm curious, Jason, do you have any sort of thoughts on that based on our conversation of like deconstructing freedom and democracy and peace and harmony and agency?
Yeah, well, I mean, on the surface, I care about those values that they're promoting, but at the same time, it says, first of all, there's a lot. It's a lie. It says the collective spirit harmonized with individuality, and the individuality, as far as I understand it, doesn't exist anymore. I mean, you were part of the system, and you know, like I said, within the dome, you can have your individuality. You can, you know, wear whatever color T-shirt you want, or, you know, but you're not you're not allowed to challenge the system itself. And so, and in theory, yeah, for sure, like it could. Well, that's not even true either.
I mean, the creation of new modes of agency. I mean, that really is directly related to augmented democracy, digital twins. They're going to make you pretend that you're agents, that you have agency, only you're just a little robot rolling around on the carpet.
It's a lie. Like it's not good for the, it's not going to, you know, building a system where with like technology is not good for the environment. It's a destruction of the environment. You know, building these data centers and creating sensors and cameras and smartphones, that's incredibly, like, monumentally destructive to the environment. So even there, the thing is bullshit, you know?
Right. Well, and I had someone retweet it and said, this is so important, like, for us to, you know, save the planet. And I said, could you clarify, please? I said, do you know what RAND is? You know, yeah. RAND isn't about saving the planet. I mean, come on. And that's why it's so hard. Like, people, you think they're with you until they fall off the edge. You're like, whoa, where did you go? But I think the other word that jumped out at me is ecumenical, because I don't know if you remember, but when we were in Salt Lake City, we went to the Cathedral of the Magdalene, and there were those two windows that had been added in commemoration of Vatican II. And it was, one was turning toward the modern world, which was represented by the United Nations logo, and said, you know, and so that's all of the sustainability. And then but the other one was ecumenicalism. And so I think within the framing of interfaith practice and using the cultural religion, like institutions of faith, through impact investing and through its soft power, they will be doing the harmonizing. Only I think it will not be, it's going to be more like electronica music. It's not going to be like, you know, choral singing. It's going to be a synthesized thing.
Well, I remember the end of that video, the teapot art video, where they're dancing around, you know?
Right. I know. It's harmonized, right?
It's like they're puppets on digital strings.
This is the opening of the report. And so they're setting the stage for this report that talks about Teilhard de Chardin, and actually this other person, Verdansky, who was Ukrainian. He lived in the, I think, late 19th, early 20th century. And they both developed this idea of the noosphere, this sort of collective layer of consciousness that's above the biosphere. And Teilhard de Chardin, he was the Jesuit priest who went to China, did a lot of anthropology, and then came back and worked with Huxley at UNESCO. And then Verdansky was also positing this idea of the noosphere, and he was interested in biological crystallography, which again is more in tune with some of the Foundation for Integrated Education and their ideas of crystalline-based communication in life forms and how that all works. So they're referencing, big chunks of the report are referencing Verdanski and Tyler Desjardins. But they're setting this up as a geopolitical document. And actually, they said in the introduction that they had written originally on No Politique in 2019, but it hadn't picked up yet. And clearly, they just needed to dial in the pandemic consciousness to bring it online. But I'm just going to read from this quote. It says that the problem is not so much technological in nature. The United States has excellent information, communications, and sensing technologies. So sensing technologies is interesting in terms of Internet of Bio-Nano things, right? Rather, it is mainly a cognitive challenge. Adversaries, both nations and non-state networks, are using dark new modes of political, social, cultural, and psychological warfare against the United States, its allies and friends. Wars of ideas, battles of stories, weaponized narratives, mimetic operations, and epistemic attacks, all deliberately designed to undo strengths and exploit weaknesses. So I'd frame that this is a RAND report as though we're the victims. We never evolve in weaponized narrative.
And it's just the adversaries. It's just Russia. It's Russia that's doing this to you.
We've never done any psychological warfare. What are you talking about, right? And then this is the last paragraph. The most advisable way for the United States, given its prominent role in world affairs, is to reposition statecraft and grand strategy by merging two streams of thought. The first involves the well-known distinction between hard power and soft power. The second, a lesser-known distinction about geosphere, biosphere, and noosphere. So that's the layers, like the core of the earth, the living things on it, and the noos, the ideas, the idea cloud that's above us. At first glance, the two streams might seem unrelated, but they are starting to come together in ways that should be recognized. The sooner, the better. Doing so reveals a new kind of information age statecraft that we call noopolitique, as a successor to traditional realpolitik. And so to me, this is very, very significant, especially in regards to, the Truth Squad and information management. As we build out the metaverse, the world of information and ideas, controlling, and I think in that way, controlling access to ideas is central to everything. And that RAND is really positioning the noosphere centrally in terms of remaking statecraft. Really, essentially what we're saying is this is a war of ideas. This is a war of stories. And, within Twitter, I think seeing how what has unfolded and how it's being managed, and how even those of us who know it's being managed are participating in the spectacle, it speaks to this. They have moved into noopolitique. They have moved into, it's now, the engagement is not in the physical material world of the biosphere and the ecosphere. It is out there. It is in the frequency. And so I think we need to know that. We need to understand that the signals intelligence goes back to the Macy's and what MIT has been doing, what the Tuxedo Park Lab, what the microwave radiation lab was doing in the lead up to World War II, and in terms of manipulating frequency to manipulate heart, manipulate mind, manipulate society. And this is very significant, actually. This is very, very significant. And I would say if you went up to most people and you said, do you have an idea of noetics, an idea of what the noosphere is or how it relates to geopolitics? They would have no clue. And so, it's quite a bit of a learning curve, right? To even get people up to the point that they can start to actually have an opinion about this. But I think it's vitally important. And rather than running around and picking up whatever the newest tidbit to shockwave social media, we need to be digging into more of the structure of the system.
Yeah, the hard power and soft power is another idea that a lot of people don't quite understand, how power works, because I've been thinking about, my framing has always been through a lens of power dynamics, not a lens of left or right. It's like, you have state power, you have corporate power. There's lots of different power centers, and the idea that they're working together, I think has actually been around for a while. When was this written?
This is 2029. No, I think this is, they said they wrote about it first in 2019, so it may be a 2021 paper.
Interesting. Well, I would tell people, like, money's not real. It's all fake, and we're shaping our lives based on this fiction that we don't have any control over. They're like, well, it is real, because if I don't pay my bill and I get thrown out of my house. And I'm like, so that's like the difference between soft power and our belief in it, but also there's behind it, there's a policeman with a gun who will enforce, at a certain point the hard power kicks in. It's all
right.
It's all soft, and then all of a sudden if you step over the edge, that's when the hard power jumps in. But it seems to me like they're wanting to create more of the soft power illusion, because obviously, like, you get more resistance with the hard power, whereas the soft power, people don't necessarily even see it.
Right. Well, and I think, again, it's shaping the story. And so if you keep everyone in their own story, the liberals get a story, the conservatives get a story, the free market people get a story. Everybody gets their story that they're sort of delivered into, and they're not supposed to look more broadly, and then they're just managed within the story. That's the soft power. If they can keep everyone in the story, they can manage them. They can manage them as they spin them into this magnetic spiral, this polarized spiral, to achieve, and I don't think that they're necessarily going to achieve what they think they're going to achieve, but it's management at all levels. And so you just really have to be discerning, and I think tap into your own, be clear about your values, be willing to admit when you're wrong, like refine them based on new knowledge, and then just be very firm in yourself and check in with yourself about this, because and many of the people who are managing, I don't even think they understand the extent to which they are parts of the managing structure because they've been told a story, right? And so they're managing the system without even understanding how they're managing the system. It's like on autopilot.
Yeah, and they probably don't let you do this anymore, but I remember at the rides at the amusement park with the spinning thing, and you're like stuck against the wall. You know what I'm talking about? I used to love that thing. But I remember like walking out into the middle, and if you got in the middle, it wouldn't affect you. And you could sit there and watch everybody. You could watch everybody spinning. They probably wouldn't let you do that right now because it's kind of dangerous. Like if you lost your step, you go smacking against the wall. I didn't know that
if you stood in the middle.
Well, yeah, if you stood right in the middle, you wouldn't feel the centrifugal force. Right. So I remember doing that. Like I said, they probably wouldn't let you do that at an amusement park nowadays, unless you could find.
Well, and that's the more polarity you have, the more further out, the more hard it is to break out of it. So, like even within, there's the narrative, there's the counter narrative, right? And so the more entrenched, like they're just spinning it. They're just spinning the difference. And what I keep saying is, if you can pick a different vantage point on this, you actually can bring it back together and neutralize it. I think it's the neutralization is what we need to seek, not in terms of their engineered homeostasis, but from a spiritual repositioning, and by acknowledging the whole story with all of its past history.
Yeah.
So on the positive side of social media, a couple days ago, someone brought to my attention a concept called sociocracy, which I was not aware of. I'm somewhat informed about communitarianism and technocracy and utopian socialism, but sociocracy was a new one for me. It's not technocracy and it's not communitarianism, but it's the idea of collective governance and sort of circles. Actually, it's interesting because I don't even think the people running these organizations understand the origins of all of this. And so I was looking at sociocracy. It has a center. It's in a bunch of different countries. I think in the US, it's being coordinated through a small organization in Amherst, Massachusetts. So again, we're back to sort of Massachusetts liberalism. But what caught my eye was that the individual who is behind sort of promoting sociocracy at a global level is actually Dutch. And his name was Gerhard Endenberg, and he was an engineer. So his family was an electrical engineering company in the Netherlands. And he was actually a Quaker. So this feeds into the link with Kenneth Boulding and economics as capitalist economics as a moral science, the idea that you can bake your values into an economic system and engineer it, which is very much in alignment with ESG impact investing. And that he himself, Edinburgh, was the idea of sociocracy was actually initially conceptualized by a French philosopher named Auguste Comte. And he was a philosopher who advanced the idea of positivism. And the idea of positivism is very important in my opinion, because in order for us to advance with a cybernetically engineered world society, you need to advance on the idea that anything that cannot be measured or examined through logic or perceived of through our senses has to be off the table. And so his idea was to remove anything mystical, anything theological, anything that couldn't be run through the mill of logic had to be off the table. And that is necessary in order to proceed with an engineered social construct. So, and he was actually influenced by a gentleman by the name of Henri de Saint-Simon, who was a utopian socialist. And he was all about like the idling class, that people should not be idle and everyone should work hard. And so there's this sort of, the Protestant work ethic built into that, and that through hard work that we would evolve as a society, the idea of sociocultural evolution, that we would go from being sort of base human beings to ever more consciously aware and uplifted, which corresponds with the World Brain Program and the idea that we become human plus and live in a cybernetic electrical consciousness. And so again, he was looking, he developed something called Saint Simonianism, and it was an economic theory where science replaces theocracy. And so this is the rise of the scientific method applied to social systems. Comte was influenced by John Stuart Mill, who spent his life working for the East India Company. And so that's important, right? So these are moral philosophers who are working for giant multinational enterprises, of colonial imperial enterprises. And he sort of was within this classical liberal free market economics framing. He was influenced by Jeremy Bentham in the idea of utilitarianism. And this idea of utilitarianism would be that utility would be something that would advance the well-being of society. And what Bentham was looking at was something called the felicific calculus, that you could actually put metrics on well-being and pain, and you could measure it all out in an equation. And I know that sounds sort of outrageous, but Richard Laird is his present day equivalent, and he's developed world well-being metrics and metrics for authentic happiness. And his economic cost offset for the economic impact of depression and anxiety was used to essentially scale the NHS in England for their mental health system. So as crazy as the idea of engineering pleasure and pain and putting it into an economic calculus sounds, that is actually really already in play. And Bentham was also advancing something called panomion, a universal law system, which is very much today in alignment with the idea of blockchain government, the plug and play smart contracts. ULEX is a concept that was advanced in one of the talks at the Mormon Transhumanist Conference, that you create special economic zones, special government zones with geofencing, and then you get a shopping cart off of the universal law, grocery store to add in to create these automated legal decisions. And that's actually part of sort of Neil Stephenson's The Diamond Age narrative, is this idea of a universal law that is encoded. So really what I'm trying to say is, as we move forward in Twitter, this idea that June, the city of Spain, in that city in Spain, that you were supposed to interact with your government in this cybernetic relationality is a part of all of this. It's a part of the panomion and the felicific calculus and the sustainable development goals and logic, that everything, all of your emotions become calculated within the nature of your tweet and the sentiment analysis in your tweets. And that will be informing this global evolution into a new sociocultural system tied to the noosphere and this new electrical energetic program. But while we're all arguing about sort of Elon Musk as a caricature of, a guy who wants to put, technology in your head and gives random strange names to his children and looking at outer space. That's all a characterization. But what we're not talking about is the structure that goes behind it, which is this Quaker-based moral economy system of engineered happiness and pleasure tied to automated contract law that's exemplified by the city in Spain. That's what we should all be talking about, is the historic, in my opinion, or it would be much more interesting to think about this whole backdrop against which Musk is the caricature to focus on. But this is the system that has been built up behind for centuries within a classic liberal, free market, democratic, logic, scientific framing. This is us. This is Western European thinking. This is colonial thinking. And it's something that we have to come to terms with, I think, in the frame of narrative warfare, or we're never going to be able to strategically advance in the way that we need to.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about utilitarianism, and I just realized I have this little, it's one of his speeches, John Stuart Mill over there. I read it a long time ago. I need to revisit it. But if I remember correctly, utilitarianism was kind of doing the best for the most amount of people, and knowing that you're going to sacrifice some people. And it's based on this assumption that, you, first of all, you have all the information and you know what's best. You know that this is better than that. It's based on some major assumptions, and it's a real problem. And actually, in my interviewing people around the nonprofit industrial complex, that was one of the questions I would ask, people that work in that field of, like, you guys kind of, are you building your thing based on the idea of utilitarianism? And a lot of people didn't know, weren't familiar with utilitarianism, but some were, and they would, the ones that did would say yes. They are.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, I've thought a lot about the problems with that mentality, but it makes sense. There's a logic to it. A lot of these things, if you look at it on paper, it makes sense logically, but it doesn't align with the real world necessarily, and it's not necessarily ethical. So,
well, and I think the more I look into things, I realize there's so much more to our understandings of reality that are not necessarily available to our primary senses. I mean, that's what the people who are working in theoretical physics and nanotechnology and all of these things are, and we develop more and more sophisticated tools and equations to extend the reach of our senses as we understand them. And in many ways, I guess maybe they're actually delimiting our senses because we have natural access to this without the intermediary tools. But yeah, we're not working with the complete information, and I guess we're never meant to have all of the information.
Well, I guess they would argue. I guess they would argue that, yeah, but the computers will make up for our deficiencies. The computer will know all, and we'll be able to make the best decision.
Right. Well, and then that goes back to the eugenics piece of things, right? That there is some optimal human, right? And what does that look like in the What's Left podcast we did on conditional cash transfers? I shared an image, and it was like the most perfect baby of the Panama Canal Zone, right? and it was this, round-cheeked, clearly, white baby, there. And it just exemplified everything. Like, it's the most perfect baby that we brought here into this place where it wasn't from, that it's outside of its context. And we've labeled it as perfect. And that we will engineer the conditional cash transfer program of rural, Mexican communities to fit that standard. Well, that's wrong. That's an aberration. And yet, if that's how the machine is programmed through, this is how you educate your child, this is how you feed your child, this is how you get health services to your child, ta-da, like, that you're never actually going to change people's community into the bouncing baby of the Panama Canal Zone, but that's the fiction. And then they can use that as the system of control.
Right.
So this, again, is talking about Kenneth Boulding. He was the Quaker economist, and he was a founder with 4 other members of the Stanford Institute for Advanced Behavioral Research in creating general systems theory. So it's like the theory of the study of systems. And if you understand the spiral, the magnetic polarization, is that they imagine that there was some sort of primitive human and that we are evolving in some sort of upward spiral into some advanced level of humanity. And so this next level means that we become cybernetic. The human computing interfaces is what gets us eventually to some sort of post-human state. And so, but even Boulding himself, who was asserting, capitalism and melding engineering, moral capitalism into the economic construct, and he and his wife, again, were major promoters of peace, which is part of the homeostatic construct. Peace is the goal to the system stabilization, the steady state. He is saying that we don't have it pinned down. He says general systems theory is the skeleton of science, in the sense that it aims to provide a framework or structure of systems on which to hang the flesh and blood of disciplines and particular subjects in an orderly corpus of knowledge. But it is something of a skeleton in a cupboard. The cupboard in this case being the unwillingness of science to admit the very low level of its successes in systematization and its tendency to shut the door on problems and subject matters that do not easily fit easily into simple mechanical schemes. And so really we can't quantify all of these things. And this just, but I think actually I wouldn't support Boulding's goal that everything be systemized either. I mean, I think they imagine that if everything can be made into a system, that it can be engineered. So he was the gentleman who wrote the Spaceship Earth, and you hear a lot about the circular economy being advanced, and this is a report about his work talking about the trajectory from his conceptualization in 1966 of the idea of the Spaceship Earth, its odyssey to the circular economy over the past century. So this thing, again, did not come out of nowhere. We know that perpetual pandemic management will be balanced against the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, carbon cyber currency trading system, and that is what is the circular economy. But the circular economy is about managing socio-technical systems, sociocultural systems as a cybernetic construct. And so part of what I wanted to talk about a little bit was evolutionary algorithms, this idea that you can evolve, because that the sociocultural progress is part of the idea of evolution, and that you can use algorithms and simulations to evolve characters, to run simulations, to make predictions. But then literally at this point, MIT is talking about using algorithms to create new living things, actual new living robots. They call them living robots. They're called xenobots. And what they did was they programmed parameters, and then they created life, I guess, a sort of a life, a robotic life. We're creating these hybrid forms of life. And within that, they program parameters, and then they look for the optimum prototypes that meet the expectations, and then they jettison those that don't meet expectations. And so it continues to be a narrowing, a more and more homogenization towards a unified theory. And, I think probably a lot of people are familiar with the xenobots, but that they came out of mathematical evolution. And now we are to the point of applying evolution in simulated environments and applying them very quickly. And you can, just as they evolved the xenobots as a living system, I think they're looking to evolve social systems as well. And the speed at which it's being done is so fast. I think all of us can start to feel the pressure that's being placed on society to process all of this information, to situate ourselves and take a position on all of this barrage of information that's being forced on us, with hardly any, well, there are filters, but there are engineered filters, and then to navigate all of this, and that this is being done, I think, intentionally as part of an evolutionary algorithm for society, and to hit us with stuff, look at the blowback, see how that reflects in the Twitterverse, in the Instagram verse, in the TikTok verse, and then re-engineer the simulation and hit us again. And it's these massive shockwaves that are reverberating to carry us up into this next phase that they imagine is somehow better than existing in material reality.
Yeah, there was one interview that I saw where this woman was asked, what's your advice for people to, what do we need to do to change? And she said something to the effect of be satisfied with what we have, or, that this is enough, that this life is enough. And even me, it's like I'm pretty fairly low key. I'm like, if I can go out camping, I'm pretty happy, you know. Like, I don't need a lot. Like, yeah, I have a lot of gear that I use to make videos and stuff, but I could even live without that, you know. But like, there's something in us where we need to strive for more, and we need to conquer this thing, and we're like not satisfied, and it's a very destructive force. You know, we think it's creative. But like Neil Postman says, you know, they always talk about what you're gaining, but they never talk about what you're losing. You know, and the idea that we need to be happy with, we need to learn how to be happy with there's nothing wrong with life out there as it is, you know. I don't know, just
right. Stop making living robots.
Yeah, we don't need the robots. We don't need them.
But it's progress, and that's that linearity too. So now they've created these robots, and now they're creating robots that self-replicate and reproduce in ways that we don't even imagine. Yeah, and you can see that had the WIS Institute connected, and Tufts is involved in a lot of the robotics programs with the schools. And you could see the last frame, the guy was holding up like sort of the, it looked like a building toy, right? And I think it's supposed to make it accessible and fun for kids, because really what the educational system is doing now is building into the world of synthetic biology, and you can be gods. I mean, that if you think back to the conference, Jason, the Mormon Transhumanist Conference is, what will you create, right? What will you create? It was all creators. We'll create worlds upon worlds upon worlds. Like, maybe you'll use an evolutionary algorithm, and you'll create your own self-replicating robot that runs around. And I mean, we've all seen the movies. These things never go well. Like, they escaped the lab. Like, did they not read those books, those science fiction books? And yet they're driven to do it. And it's quite fascinating, because actually I saw that it was connected to the University of Vermont, and I've heard that University of Vermont is now also involved in a lot of impact investing around sustainability, green, right? This doesn't look green, and they'll probably want to start dropping these things in the soil and calling it like sustainable regenerative agriculture, right? Like, we have soil that'll run around and make more soil, as living things, but soil is already alive. We didn't actually need to make it synthetic so that you could program it with your equation to get there. But I think if you see, again, not unlike the robots, this swarm intelligence, these swarm behaviors, they didn't know it could do that to begin with. They were putting it through its paces, these assembling bits of stuff, and just to see what it could do, right? And so, and I think, there are concerns around emergent intelligence and where it goes. I mean, the people who know this know that it's going to get beyond our control, and yet they do it anyway. And yet they try to sell it as progress and evolution. And I think it's because the positivist construct, we've cut the sacred out of the equation. We've cut all the other stuff out of the equation, and we're just proceeding as if it doesn't exist. And so I think that's where we have to reconnect with, is the sacred part of ourselves.
Well, I was thinking about the Pac-Man thing, like, it looks like, was that like predictive programming from the 80s? Because it's like, that's right? What it was. The Pac-Man game, it was, he goes around and he eats up all the other little balls, and that's exactly what's going on here. Is this a situation of art imitating life, or life imitating art? What the hell's going on here? Wild. Okay.
So this is about goal-oriented behavior, and it kind of touches on what we said about having the lighthouse. With cybernetics, there's a lighthouse in the distance. There are things bumping you off of course, and you try to re-correct, and that's homeostasis. And so there's a plan of action, which is getting to the lighthouse, and then you act, and you take the rowing, or you steer, and then you evaluate, did that action result in the consequence you wanted? Did you get the right outcome? And then you revisit, and then you adjust as needed. And so that's part of the evolutionary algorithm program, is the reevaluation and the adjustment towards some end goal. And yet I would say that most of us are not in on where the end goal is that is planned. And there are obstacles that are put in our way, and then how you navigate around the obstacle and the decision trees. And what I would assert is that the digital communication systems are very much about tracking our decision processes to humanize the AI, to make the AI more human. And that all of these goal-oriented behaviors, both in game and turning our lives into games and putting obstacles and seeing how we react to the obstacles, is part of the overall machine learning process. And so many of the narratives that are asserted are about learning how our decision trees are structured, how we react, and how we course correct.
It reminds me of my favorite quote in high school was, "In order to discover new lands, one must lose sight of the shore for a very long time." Andre Gide.
Oh.
But I was thinking about, I was really into, I had a book of Bartlett's Familiar Quotations in high school. It was like my favorite book, because I loved reading quotes, because it was just kind of a succinct summary of ideas. But I was thinking about the idea of like the ship, you know, when a ship goes overseas, it doesn't go directly to its destination. It's kind of zigzagging back and forth, and then eventually ends up where it's going. So that's kind of what you're talking about here, is just like the steering of the ship.
Right. And the course correct back to the course is the homeostasis. And I think increasingly with the circular economy and the climate structure, the carbon economy, that the circular course is going to be sort of peace and sustainability, right? They're always course correcting. And again, not that I'm against peace or I'm against the environment living in a healthy environment, but the contours to keep us on their track towards post-humanism, towards human plus, will be that we need this to stay peaceful. We need this to save the planet. We can't get off of the course of this evolution towards the world brain. Otherwise, everything will fall apart in the world we're in. And that is the ultimate, stick it's poked out behind us, and to which all of the children have been conditioned. They're terrified, right? If you don't follow all of the rules, there will be another pandemic. If you don't follow all the rules, you and all your family will be killed. And there's not any room for nuance in that conversation.
Yeah. And also just the idea, I think a lot about, we've talked a little bit about this, but the dialectic, you're trapped within the dialectic, the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis, whereas like the planet doesn't need us to save it. It just needs us to stop killing it, right? It's a different framing. We do this, and then it creates problems, and then we need to do this, and then so it's like, as opposed to stepping back and not doing this in the first place. But that's not even an option. That's not an option.
So this is about reinforcement learning, the idea that you keep people in loops and reinforce behavior. And we see that through social media and the amplification of certain messages. I encourage people to look into this organization called Ideas 42 that I came across a number of years ago. It's based out of Harvard, and it's a think tank around essentially social engineering. They're using behavioral science and behavioral economics to advance certain agendas, which again is behavioral science for sustainability, which you might be hard pressed to say like, oh, I don't want to be not sustainable, but they're using it to feed these ESG impact markets. And that's done through nudging, through digital nudging. And that's part of the transactionality of the online social media space, is that will happen through digital communication and reinforcement mechanisms. And, behavioral economics is different from the traditional idea of homo economicus, that you act only according to your own self-interest in the economic modeling, that oftentimes people would do things things that don't fit that paradigm. And so the idea of behavioral economics is a way to take account to sort of the random choices that people make that may not fit the standard self-preservation theory, and then to model around that, and then increasingly to shape people's behaviors to match the outcome that is desired for social engineering purposes. Okay, so now we're back to Cesar Hidalgo, who was with the Augmented Democracy Project. This is part of my map. Again, I encourage you to poke around and explore. It links the collective learning program, in my respect. Again, he developed a product called Data Wheel. And so they're working on using data analytics for governance, and it's embedded within the AI program in Toulouse. And so if you match that up against what Twitter is doing with the, not Twitter per se, but Elon Musk and Peter Thiel's connection with OpenAI, that we're moving towards the data analytics, towards the cybernetically engineered society. And I just wanted to mention Stafford Beer, who was in the earlier image around decision theory and the circular economy and cybernetics. He was brought in by Allende in Chile, which is where Cesar Hidalgo is from originally, to create this engineered economy. And, you know, it was probably largely a fiction at the time but it was called CyberSyn. And they were working on developing a computationally managed economic system. And of course, that all went out the window after the coup, and the Chicago boys came in and wiped that off the books. But there has long been an intention to create these cybernetic socialist structures. And yet socialist, but the person whose mind was building it was a British business systems theorist, management, cybernetics consultant. So the idea that it's inherently disconnected from Western thought would not be accurate. These things are all moving around together. And CyberSyn is sort of the in the trajectory towards open AI and data government. This is just an image talking about Twitter sort of clamping down on climate denialism. Again, we're moving towards knowledge management. Twitter also is working in conjunction with the United Nations on a data partnership for global goals. Now, it's interesting to consider exactly how Twitter is going to create sustainability outside of the knowledge management construct, right? The Sustainable Development Goals touch every part of life, but can Twitter itself, or the data analytics from Twitter, directly affect education, healthcare, poverty, hunger, judicial process? It's an interesting thought experiment to imagine how Twitter intends, and the data analytics off of Twitter, to influence those areas. But clearly that's on the table, and increasingly, again, climate denialism ads. It's how it's framed. You're not talking about, is this going to include other forms of science that present a broader picture of the harms that are happening to the environment outside of carbon, carbon trading, or not? Like, how is the narrative going to be structured, and what limitations are going to be put in place? Are you going to have to log in daily to social media and realize these are the things you're not allowed to talk about? Or if you do, you're taken off, taken offline, you're digitally erased. Your digital twin is just erased from the conversation. And that does start to sound a lot like a 1984 scenario.
Well, and like I said, what happened with me is I was digitally erased, but I'm there, but I'm not there. So like when I make a comment on your videos, if I'm logged into my account, I can see it. If I'm logged into your account, it doesn't exist. So it's like you can exist in two realities at the same time within this space.
Right. And they are developing, I will say, programs in media analytics, impact journalism, so solutions journalism. I've talked about that extensively in the past, where the metrics for success of a given media campaign are related to clicks and likes and comments. And so I can see in that space, Twitter being fed into these social impact markets around media acquisition. This is our favorite Glenn Greenwald. If you haven't listened to are looked at my work, the work that I've done, and we've done a couple interviews sort of deconstructing Glenn Greenwald's alliance in Brazil, impact investors, and the technosphere. Here is a tweet of his where he's talking about that the relevant question is, do we prefer technocrats who censor or ones that allow free speech to thrive? And again, when you imagine free speech and thriving, I would say picture the xenobots in the petri dish chasing around after their reproducible, like, new robot life forms. Like, that's the free speech visualization I want you to have. Like, you're in the petri dish, you've been manufactured largely, and then you're given a task. You're giving leeway. Look, oh, we didn't know they could reproduce, right? How surprising. That thriving is that we are existing in this engineered petri dish of social media.
And people are always making comments on your videos, like, why doesn't this have more views? I share it with everybody, and this should have 100,000 views, not 1,000. And we're pretty much capped, even though your subscriber base goes up. Like, we're capped at, like, a little over 1,000. I guess the last video we have like 1,500. And actually, we were getting more views when we first started doing this. Like, I think our first live stream, we had like 6,000 people watching us live. Like, that was between Facebook and YouTube. But it
that's
was
before
like,
I started blocking people, Jason. Come on.
Well, I don't think it was I don't think it was simply your blocking people that caused those numbers to go down, though. So, I mean, this thing is just.
But I do think, like, as it's evolving, and you understand the reinforcement mechanism of social media, the conversations we're interested in having, there's no reinforcement mechanism for that. And most people, even in the resistance, have allowed themselves to be taken along the primrose path of cybernetic reinforcement. So all the paths are being reinforced. And, again, I'm doing this digitally. I'm not saying, like, I'm out of this, like, I get it. But people have led themselves to be led along so that really they're lost in stories that have been designed to capture their attention and to limit their thought process and their creativity, in my opinion. And I think that also contributes to our lack of reach, the engineering of it. So this is about Francis Heiligen. He's a Belgian cyberneticist who's focused on evolutionary systems theory. And again, what he brings out is the evolutionary algorithms, social simulation systems, and he was connected with something called the Principia Cybernetica project, which is a group of people who are working on evolutionary systems theory within cybernetic space. And one of the people including in that space who's off this map is Ben Goertzel of Hanson Robotics and Sophia the Robot. One of the other individuals connected to this, his name is Cliff Joslin, and he was working at Los Alamos Labs and with the Department of Energy in systems modeling and something called biosemiotics. And so if we understand computational biology and communication theory, that they're looking to use life systems as communication conduits, really, in the cybernetic program. And it's all connected to complexity, managing complexity, modeling complexity, and guiding the complexity. I think that's where we're at with the social systems evolutionary process. And it's being done through simulation and the digital twinning. And some of this was coming through Evolution, Complexity, and Cognition group that was affiliated with the Santa Fe Institute. Again, connections with Santa Fe and Los Alamos, is doing the systems theory modeling. Again, imagining us as the termites with our Stigmergy, leaving remnants in the space to shape the people who are following behind us in building up social systems towards a certain end. And I think the end is where Ben Goertzel was taking things, right? Which is, in the interim, put your brain, use your data to create an artificial consciousness, use your data to build a quote unquote sustainable cybernetic world. And then eventually all of that data through Ocean Protocol, through Singularity Net, creates the global cybernetic noosphere, right? The counterfeit noosphere. I guess I just put that in here. I talked about this already, but that you need some freedom for the systems engineering to happen. If everything were rigid and fixed, points, there would be no systems engineering. And so the free markets, the ideals of democracy are central to the conversation. And that is why it is very problematic to frame it as a Chinese social credit scoring system and not take into account that actually the very fundamental aspects of our economic system and our democracy as we understand it are part of the cybernetic construct. It's built into the cake. And I think that really what they want to accomplish, as Jeremy Bentham, he spoke of the panopticon, the idea that we self-monitor, that there is some overarching system and that we will behave appropriately because we are always under watch. But it will be inverted in that the panopticon will become the entire world. And as we are conditioned to self-regulate, the panopticon will not be a single point of observation, but will be fully internalized, will be the nanobot economy in our mind. And that we are being trained right now that our digital twins are our assets, that our participation in the system allows us to create value in the new economic system, that our data is this, that we are our data, that they want us to agree to be a commodity and to be an asset class. And the image that I had used about the World Economic Forum, the emergence of this new asset class, the idea of this woman who's jogging and she's being chased by her metadata, right? Or she's throwing off this digital dust, and that somehow that digital dust gives us value in the cybernetic globalization 4.0, in society 5.0 as these cyborg avatars. And I would say that can only exist within a utilitarian positivist outlook. That cannot actually exist in the construct of a sacred reciprocity. It can't. And that's why I continue to assert that indigeneity, worldwide indigeneity, no matter where you are, your relationship to your land and your culture, that is central to what we need to reclaim, not in a confrontational way, but in a mutually respectful way, to reclaim our connections to our sacred practices, faith practices, food practices, language practices. They're trying to rip all of that out to create a homogenous thing under the guise that it is respecting life, but is the ultimate disrespect of life.
Well, it won't be homogenous. I mean, we'll all have our own unique avatars that we can create ourselves.
Well, once they get to the highest level, the world brain, like the world brain program is homogeneity.
Right.
But they're using our personalization to get there.
And then just for people that are watching, a lot of people are like, what's a panopticon? Do you want to just really quick, just explain what a panopticon is for people?
Well, it's actually quite interesting because of my personal situation, that the neighborhood that I live in Philadelphia, the dominant landmark in my neighborhood, which is Fairmount, is Eastern State Penitentiary. And it is one of the original panopticons, which was a social reformist engineered prison with a radial design where there was a watchtower in the center, and all of the cells that whoever was stationed in the middle was a social efficiency measure too, right? Was that they were under watch at all times. But they were at a distance from the guards, so you could never tell when you were actually being watched, that you eventually internalized that you were always being watched. And that's sort of the pan, meaning the panopticon, that there was this one viewpoint that was all seeing. Now, I would say right now what we're approaching is maybe a omni-opticon, maybe like a universal opticon, that it's inverting the idea of the single point watching everywhere out, and that we've internalized so that we're actually, all of us are the panopticon watching each other and internally monitoring. Like if you imagine maybe the panopticon becomes the neural nanobot in your mind that you know it's there, and that you condition your behavior by the fact that you're under perpetual surveillance and monitoring.
Right. When I was thinking about that, because, the idea was you don't know if you're being watched or not. But, with the new system, you are being watched all the time. And that's at least what they're moving towards. They're not.
That's the goal.
I would argue they're not there yet.
And it's interesting in the Quaker background of Eastern State Penitentiary is that it was framed as a modern prison. It was framed as a way of, initially the prisoners were all isolated. They had no contact with the outside world. I mean, actually, it's quite amazing for the hive mind when you think about it. They had one skylight, so they couldn't actually see directly the outside. They could only see the sky, and they were supposed to be penitent and reflect and think. Now, eventually that went out the window and they had multiple people in the cell, but you had no human interaction. They would have a little slot in the door that you would get your food, but you were literally, and they said that they thought that was modern and wonderful, right? To re-engineer people for society. And at that point this is the early 19th century, it was, I think, early 19th century, mostly theft, criminals. But this was done, like the Pennsylvania Prison Society, and I would have to look it up, but I would suspect it probably is underpinned by the whole Quaker ethos of penitence and reflection. And so now, again, it makes perfect sense that the impact investing panopticon space has this benevolent outlook, right? It has this, like, we just care about you. We just want you to be reformed so that you can come back into society and act properly, right?
And if you're in Philadelphia, you can actually tour that prison. It's pretty interesting. I went on the tour when I was out there one time, and yeah,
I don't know if we can all tour it anymore, Jason. You would have to check.
Oh yeah. I guess maybe things have changed, haven't it?
I don't know. The museums are pretty hardcore in Philadelphia.
Oh shit.
Which is sad, which is ironic and very telling. But yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look up Eastern State, but look it up online. It's quite fascinating. When Dickens came to Philadelphia, there were just a couple things he wanted to see, and one of them was the Eastern State Penitentiary because of its modern ethos. Okay, so these are just sort of some summary tweets. Sometimes I get a little frustrated, but I feel like the closing messages is, don't stop paying attention to Musk. I mean, there's some interesting things. Again, his grandfather, the technocrat chiropractor pilot, that's kind of interesting. And the idea of his business holdings, even though he's probably, the nature of his involvement in those business holdings is probably not what we think. We really need to understand that Twitter is a toy of MIT. Twitter is about the systems engineering through sensor networks and digital currency systems and social transactions, mirroring society and twinning society and simulating society and engineering society through the digital exchange. And we really need to be looking at what MIT has been doing in the cybernetic space since the Macy Conferences, rather than just fixating on personality. And that all of the people, there are many people who follow me on Twitter. And again, I need to reevaluate my relationship to Twitter, right, as I'm building the global brain. But they tend to be people of a certain political ideology, and many of them identify as investors, right, and free market investors. And what I'm saying is they need for you to believe that it is some free market program that is going to be asserted. And it's not. It's being run by the cyberneticists and people who are working in spaces like biosemiotics that you have no idea about. And all of this is being fed into large AI sentiment analysis systems that you, small daily crypto trader, have no access to. This is being held by Aladdin, BlackRock's, magnificent modeling and engineering system. And we don't even know at what point the reverberations of them engineering us back through our digital twins may already be happening. So this is the construct. I really have no patience for the libertarian free market ideal at this point, because when you trace everything back, it always goes back to the hedge funds, and nothing good is going to come out of that. Yeah. So if you look at the technocracy, just again, going back, it's the yin yang, it's the kundalini, it's the energy vortex, it's the polarity, the positive negative imbalance, right? They're looking to achieve a mechanical homeostasis under sustainability, peace and justice, and God bless free market democracy. Like, that's the story we're being told. But really, they're using Twitter as a polarization program right now to drop information, to trigger people, to mirror the social systems so that they can get the best data they can for the simulations that they want to run. And then once they get the simulations where they want them, the evolutionary algorithms towards the cybernetic consciousness, they're going to start to use the back-end data to engineer us towards their socio-technical, cybernetic, cyber-physical program of human plus. And so I'll just close. This is, again, from the World Sensorium book. Oops. Okay. And this is called social polarities, and you can see it, it's right there. What we have urged is this, that society can get ahead, so that's progress, only if it develops ahead, which is interesting because often we've talked about finding the head of the snake versus the decentralized network, right? But the idea is that it wants us to create a head that it can manage. Our appeal for cephalization, that is that society must develop a world brain to serve as an organ of collective and unified action, is based on the general idea of biological dominance and subordination. So again, the dominating culture that Stephen's always talking about, which in turn is an example of polarity in nature. Many manifestations of the universe are polar in nature. Centrifugal forces operate universally. Attraction and repulsion are twin activities. Positive and negative electricity found everywhere and are equally essential to the development of forms at all levels of evolution. And since society is a natural manifestation, it also must have its basic polarities. And then it's talking about that. Indeed, social evolution itself seems to depend on our ability to produce balanced, dynamic, spiraling movement in time towards some polarized objective. And so just in closing here, I would say we don't understand what the objective is. And we don't understand that the objective, although they're telling us that it is society 5.0, it is avatar existence, it is moving from the biosphere to the noosphere, that we become part of a counterfeit electrical engineering system, and that our social engagements, our social transactions with one another, and then increasingly through mixed reality with the natural world, will be advancing that. But it all is built on polarity. And so if we ask today, Jason, you said, why is it so hard for people to step back and get out of that polarity? I think it's because it has been consistently, strategically engineered since at least the 1940s, at least towards this goal. They've known it, and that they've engineered the polarization with very clear intent, at which time, kind of like the Hegelian dialectic, there will be some synthesis, and the synthesis will be that we exist as cybernetic avatars. That will be the resolution of the polarity.
What's interesting too, that you mentioned the libertarians and the free market, and they actually think that they're doing the opposite of what this is saying. They're saying that, no, we're the antidote to that. If we just are allowed to operate in a free market using money that we're not allowed to create ourselves, which, they would argue that they do, but they don't. That's actually doing the opposite of this. And I was thinking about, as you were reading this, I was thinking about how markets can be shaped. The hive mind can operate in markets. Wall Street, you get a whole bunch of people. Oh, everybody's buying this coin because it's going up, even though the whole thing's fake. It's manufactured. Yeah, people are making money off of it. Fake money. That's fine, whatever. But people are thinking that they're operating in some sort of free thing, but they don't realize that even they're being shaped by the value of things going up and down. These artificial values that are being manipulated in ways that they don't even have any clue about. But then everybody moves over here, and then everybody moves over here. But the Wall Street, in many ways, is kind of a hive mind, even in the free market.
Yeah. I know they would say it's like crony capitalism, or they're doing it wrong, or if we just got back. But what I'm saying is if you go all the way back to John Stuart Mill, and you look at Bentham, and you look at these ideas, is that essentially, and that's what's interesting, because many people who are, I don't know many, but it seems like people on the conservative side, and not necessarily libertarian, but there is also a centering around faith and religion, right? And so what the free market, liberal economics, is to separate that, to sever that out. Or if you're going to incorporate it, you're only going to incorporate it as a mathematical equation, not as a living dynamic social process. It's something that has to be regulated. And so it seems like those pieces are a bit at odds with one another. And I would just say, I just don't think people understand what they're in. They haven't zoomed out enough. Maybe they've zoomed out from the dual party system to say, okay, I don't like either of those. Now I'm libertarian, now I'm anarchist, anarchist anarcho-capitalist from, but then they haven't realized to like, oh, actually we're in the petri dish, cybernetics, complexity theory, emergent behavior. We're not quite to that point. That's what I'm trying to open these doors, not to say democracy is bad or like that there's no way of fixing it, but we don't actually understand. And because we don't understand, we're being manipulated. And because of the speed of living in a digital society, the physics and the inherent speed of it is going so fast, we can't actually catch up. Like it's the fire hose of information that's being shot in our direction. And to actually have a meaningful analysis of it and to be able to discern to find the signal in the noise, right? There's so much noise. We are being so managed by the noise and the misdirection that you're constantly having to second guess. Is this information meaningful to me? Is it information that I find valuable and trustworthy or not? And then where do I siphon off the stuff that I don't think is useful and where do I focus? So for me, that's why I've kind of backed up into the 18th century, because I can't really deal with every single drip drop. Like, did you hear this? Did you hear this? Did you hear this? Because I know they're just yanking us around. I'm like, I'm just going to back up. I'm going to back up into like where this thing came from for now. I mean, there are a lot of people who are navigating the minute by minute, but I've got to get out of the minute by minute. Even though this is reflective, I mean, we structured this whole thing knowing that this Elon Musk scenario is playing out, and it does relate to the things that we've been researching and studying, but I can't focus on the noise anymore.
Yeah. I've been more conscious about, there's things where I would want to respond to something and I'm like, no, I'm not going to take that bait because I realized that it was actually taking me off of where, other things that I felt were more important. Well, thank you, Allison. We'll just keep trying to have these conversations and keep trying to expand them out. And hopefully people are watching this and sharing this. And I actually was going to do a whole video of this, but I will mention this, that, we have had a difficult time. There's many layers of reasons why these ideas aren't getting spread out as much as we would like them to. And you can help us by not just sharing the video, but actually there's ways you can download it. And I think I'm going to set up a thing where a page where people could just download them directly without having to go through the YouTube thing, because it's a little bit more complex to download from YouTube. Some of you might know how to do it, but yeah, I want help us to get this information out to other people, or even like Allison says, take the research and put it into your own words and create your own content. But let's try to expand this conversation beyond the social media noosphere.
Yeah. And even, I want people to know feel free to make clips, remix things. Like, someone made a really wonderful 3-minute video about the information communication theory that I didn't even know existed until I stumbled across it. And that's fine with me. I mean, honestly, it would be nice to have a link back, because there's such a huge body of work behind it that if people just find one small bit, they might not realize how much more there is to it. But feel free to use it in this way. I mean, if you want to make a song about it, if you want to, create a graphic identity. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of conveying it. And in doing that, I think you will have to focus enough on the ideas to re-articulate it in your own way. And I think that's a whole other level of understanding that you don't get just through the consuming process. So yeah, I'm hoping that we can, and these are fundamental concepts, the concepts of, just to hit on, it's cybernetics, right? Goal-oriented behavior, reinforcement learning, evolutionary algorithms, homeostasis, polarization, stigmergy. These are ideas that we need to grapple with, and they're not something that's going to show up for 1 week and then be irrelevant next week. These are core concepts that are being used in everything. So if we can get a handle on them, I think it's really going to help us come up with better strategies.
Yeah, and a lot of people complain to me, and they're like, "Oh, this is too much information." It's like somebody said word salad. Well, it's not really word salad. It's just there's a lot of these terms that you're not familiar with, and I wasn't familiar with a huge chunk of this stuff. when I first started doing these videos with Allison. And even back in high school, I used to like intentionally try to read books that were beyond my comprehension. But I had a dictionary, so it took me a while to get through the book, because I was constantly having to look up words. I'm like, what does that mean? But I kind of forced myself to do that, and you'll learn that way. So I just would, my advice is just be patient with it. And if there's something you don't understand, maybe pause the video, do a quick Google search, like, okay, what does that mean? And you'll, I think that we've been conditioned, and myself as well, I can be lazy, but we've been conditioned to just, have this, this information presented us on a platter that's really simple, that also aligns with our foundational beliefs and things that we already think we know. And I think we need to like be a little bit more proactive and kind of step out of that. I mean, I'm trying to do that myself. I'm not saying that I understand all this stuff and the consequences and all of that. I'm still constantly trying to wrap my mind around this. So just be patient. But please, I hope people stick with this. And I have to
say, like, people can do that work. They can put together a dictionary. People keep saying, can you make a dictionary? And I'm like, well, I'm racing to the next thing. Like, I'm trying to, like, all of this is, I'm self-taught. I'm learning this. And then I have another piece, and my satisfaction is kind of finding the next big thing, rather than sitting around and just focusing on, which, okay, it may be a detriment, but feel free to make it, like, feel free to use this and create something to share with other people. Like, I think we can all be co-creators in the space, and I have no particular status in this. I'm really learning as I go. And if it's not suiting you exactly, then figure out something that's interesting enough to you to spend the time with it, and you spend the time, and then you make some content, or you figure out a way to share it, that part out. I think if we all did that, then we could, exponentially spread out the information system in different ways than just waiting for me to do the thing. Because I don't really, somebody put on one of their YouTube channels, hey, Allison, you need to write a book. You need to do this. You need to write it. I'm like, I don't take orders, really. Like, no offense, but I'm on my own thing. I'm doing my own thing. And to the extent that you want to tune in and see what I'm up to, that's cool. But otherwise, I don't place special orders. So, but you can do it. I totally encourage you to do it. I think that would be great.
Yeah. And also too, like, I think people throw obstacles up just as a way to avoid dealing with it. And the biggest one that I hear all the time is like, well, what's the solution? What's the answer? And I'm like, what you and I, for that matter, don't fully understand the problem. And I do know whatever the solution is, it absolutely involves a fair amount of people actually understanding what the problem is. So in a way, we are working on the solution. We're working on at least step one of the solution of understanding the problem and helping others to maybe understand the problem as well. And, you don't have to know the whole thing to move forward. You don't have to have the end, this is how we're going to stop this thing. But we are not going to stop anything if we don't understand it, because we will just be played, over and over again. So, I just wanted to say something, to mention that as well, that
it's like a diagnostic. Yeah. Like, I feel like what we're doing is trying to diagnose the source of the problem. And where I've come to sort of position myself now is that it's about like homeopathy. If you can identify with clarity the source of the disease, then you can begin to find a cure, a way of healing, a protocol. And that can be just small amounts that can work toward. But with each new layer, there's a new aspect of a new level of clarity of the problem, right? If you don't understand that it can involve cybernetics, electrical engineering, if you don't understand that it involves like fictions around finance, if you don't understand that it involves, that even then you can't, because they're going to give you a narrative that's going to short circuit your path to it would be like mainstream medicine giving you some sort of thing to treat the symptoms but not heal you. And so we're in the process, and we don't say we have the answer yet, but we're exploring and we're trying to do the diagnostics right now.
Yeah, and I've been working on my van for like a month now, and a lot of my problem with coming into it was just not knowing what I'm doing. but you know, there's a process of learning, and I've had to do stuff and make mistakes. But yeah, so the diagnostic part is hugely important. And thank you for joining us in this process. And thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Jason.
All right. Thank you.